One. All right. Nice. We are live. What's happening, guys?
Chilling.
Chilling.
Hello, Internet.
All right. So we are back to read some more Levinas, to talk some more about Levinas, to ask some questions, and also have fun while we're doing it, because books are good for you, but they're also fun. And I learned that from Geordie LaForge.
Reading Rainbow.
Reading Rainbow. It's not, his name isn't Geordie LaForge. What's his actual name?
LeVar Burton.
LeVar
LeVar
Burton. Yeah. He will always be Geordie LaForge to me. So we're gonna read. But before we read, I think I definitely had some questions, and there's been some discussion and some, I don't know, some things that at least I'm unclear on, that I kind of wanted to go through before we jump back into the ocean of the text. And one of them, just this week, one of our fellow travelers, Zachary, posted a question / statement in the form that we're doing. And then I responded to him this morning, but I was busy. I wasn't paying attention, and I didn't fully read his question. He asked about something from section B, and I answered him with an answer from section C. But like, I went back and actually read his post, and he wasn't talking about section C. So I wasn't giving him the proper time of day. I was just trying to get ahead of myself. But I do think the question that he's raising is an interesting one. And before we went live, we talked about it a little bit. Christopher similarly thought it was an interesting one, and had ChatGPT kind of give their take on it, or hit its take on it. And I thought that was interesting. So I figured we could start out with that.
Do you want me to read his question first before the response?
That's actually a good idea, and I don't have it pulled up. So if you do have it pulled up,
Yep.
Awesome.
Okay, so I copied his question, but I'll just read it from ChatGPT. So I said, question about totality and infinity, and then the rest is Zach. In preparation for subsection C, I went back into previous sections looking for passages about justice, and I have a new concern. On page 72, Levinas says, justice consists in recognizing the other as my master. Fair enough. However, upon further inspection, I'm pretty sure that this is Levinas critiquing Plato's position in the Phaedrus, a critique which appears to go all the way to the end of part 4 of subsection B. And so my question is this section the foundation for the understanding the other as master? If so, I don't think Levinas's position is that the other is necessarily a master. In fact, I believe he is critiquing a position that would see it in this way. This feels decisive as we enter into the section of justice. So that's what I plugged in. Didn't change his question or anything like that. And this is Skynet, aka ChatGPT. Your observation about Levinas's discussion of the other as master is astute, especially in relation to his critique of Plato. Levinas's reference to justice as recognizing the other as my master indeed seems to engage with and critique a Platonic or hierarchical conception of relationships, where the other is placed in a position of mastery. However, Levinas's use of the term master here is complex. It is not merely about a hierarchical relationship, but rather about the ethical encounter with where the other commands an infinite responsibility from me. In this sense, the other is master, because they call upon me to respond ethically beyond any equal reciprocity or power dynamic. Your interpretation that Levinas critiques a view that would see the other as necessarily a master is insightful. Levinas is indeed challenging traditional conceptions of mastery and subordination, emphasizing instead a relational dynamic rooted in ethical responsibility. This critique is foundational for understanding Levinas's broader discussion of justice, as it leads to the idea that justice emerges from the asymmetrical relationship with the other, not from a strict hierarchy, but from an ethical demand that cannot be reduced to power relations. So, as you enter the section on justice, it's important to keep in mind that Levinas is redefining what it means for the other to be a master. This redefinition is crucial for understanding his concept of justice, which is not about enforcing power or hierarchy, but about responding to the ethical call of the other. And that was the entirety of the response.
Mandy said here in the chat, she said she's freaked out because she thought that Skynet or that ChatGPT asked that question, but no, it was Zachary who asked it, ChatGPT who responded, and that response is a little freaky. Nevertheless, it's a little uncanny because I can't find myself strongly disagreeing with it, and like I mean, if I were sitting here looking at it, I'm sure I could poke holes in it, but as far as like taking it at face value, I think I like that response, and I think that response is kind of getting at or getting near where I stand. Over the weekend, Will kind of raised a similar point as far as like this redefinition of mastery and subordination, and yeah, I think ChatGPT is picking up what Levinas put down all those years ago. And that's, I don't know, that's a little freaky. Like when you find yourself looking at an algorithmically generated response and you're like, oh yeah, I don't disagree with that. I don't know, that's a little uncomfortable. But again, nevertheless, like I think that's what's going on. As far as this, yeah, the relationship to mastery, to kind of subordination. It's not so much that if we want to be the metaphysician, we have to prop up the other and kind of do this, like Wayne's World, we're not worthy. But it is this thing where it's like, no, you're recognizing this asymmetrical relation between you and the other, and in fact, I would even say it's a non-relation, but it's asymmetrical, and it's through the recognition of that you open up this ethical space. Yeah, I think that's what's going on, and of course, the words mastery and subordination and the notion of height and verticality and all that. It's, I don't know, it's slippery, it's sloppy, but I think Levinas is clear on this. I think so. Now, I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think I would agree. I was thinking too, like master, almost like in like Star Wars sense, like you're like a Padawan, and it's like the master in the sense that you're looking for guidance. In a sense, like obviously Levinas is throwing a more like ethical spin, but it's more of like a reverence, and it's like I respect you and your infinity as the other, that's calling upon me to respond to you as a human, as a face, in the sense that it's like he says early on, like the face is thou shalt not kill. So it's like that's a commandment that the other is kind of like proclaiming to you just in their face. And I think it's just more in that like reverence and in a respect type of essence, as opposed to just kind of like, you need to listen to me, I'm hot shit, I'm above you, and you're like subordinate in the sense of like boss, like worker, like capital sense. Like I think he's not really putting it in that frame. And to me, I kind of frame it as like a almost like a call of conscience, but it's from the other that is having that call. And then I
Yeah.
think the chat GPT thing, like to me, it's probably just pulling like stuff like Critchley and other people on the internet have said that it has access to. So I just look at it as like a quick tool. Like I'm sure if we looked up like into Google Simon Critchley and like master or something like that, and pull up some essays that this plagiarized off of. So it's not as bad, but it still is kind of unsettling from that perspective. But I just use it as like a Wikipedia. Like I wouldn't paste this in a forum and tell Zach it was me. Like, but it's
I
still interesting.
Dude, these large language models are fantastic research assistants. The fact that there are students who are trying to use them to like write papers and turn it in, like, yeah,
Mm,
that's wrong, and it's also scary. But the fact that like you can do that, you can copy paste, and you can use it to search. Like it's a hyper search. And yeah, it's a great research tool. I don't think anybody should be afraid of using it. I don't think anybody should hide the fact that they're using it when you use it in this way to help you do this type of research, because it's fucking phenomenal. Like it really does extend your reach. I even do it with my writings. Like you can connect your Google Drive to it, and like I can search shit that I've written, or I can even search themes. Like if I
that's cool.
don't remember specifically what I want to find, but I know I wrote something, I can search based on the theme, and it can kind of pull up. And it gets it wrong sometimes too. But
Mm,
often it can at least point you in the right direction. Um, so yeah, if anybody isn't using these tools, then you should give it a shot, but do it the way we're talking about. Don't be like, oh, I'm gonna write an essay with ChatGPT and pretend I wrote it, because
yeah.
that
No.
that sucks.
And it's very general too. Like if I were to ask it to give me like quotes, it's probably gonna get page numbers wrong or like the work wrong.
Or
Because I would use it to like double check.
it can make shit up too, which is a big
Yeah, that's
problem.
true.
So
Mm,
like if you don't have the book, or if you're not going back behind the text and like actually looking in the text itself, and you're just taking its word for it, you will
mm,
get pie on your face, or however that saying goes. But
Egg on your face.
egg on your face. There we
okay,
go.
yeah,
Um so this asymmetric non-relation, it's kind of recognizing this quality that the other has, this quality being the infinity, or the notion of perfection or humanness. And it's through that recognition that you kind of enter into this ethical, and it's still a non-relation. Like it's never reciprocal. It's never mathematically reciprocal. But once you enter into this space with other humans, then it can be reciprocal in this different way. It's not a one-to-one, and it's not mathematic, but it's human all too human. And yeah, it almost feels silly to call it mastery and subordination today. But in the text, like I think it's very clear in the text.
mm,
But it is also a little weird, a little screwy, because like the connotations that those words have.
mm,
So I feel better about how I was feeling about that, because I was unsure. Like I was like, oh yeah, I was being called to question by Zach reposting that. I was like, am I totally wrong about this? And I could very well be totally wrong about it, but it seems like at least we're collectively wrong. At least we're moving in that direction. And then when I responded with what I responded with from section C, like I feel I don't feel as bad as I felt earlier, because it's like, no,
mm,
I like we're still talking about the same thing. It's, and again, going back to the fact that Levinas is doing this almost iterative approach. He says something, and then he'll say it again, and he'll say it again, to drive the point home, and also to allow the argument and the notions and the concepts to kind of unfold as they as they need to. Yeah. What are some of the other questions? And by the way, Will, over the weekend when Will brought up how are we recontextualizing kind of mastery and domination and subordination and submissiveness and stuff like that. I think that was a great point that he kind of came out and said what I think a lot of us had been thinking, but the way he said it, the way he presented it, was like, yeah, hell yeah, that's spot on. So shout out Will. And that was in the breakout session after the discussion on Saturday, was it?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, that was the second one, like the
after party.
Yeah. And I think that's on YouTube too, which is cool.
Yeah.
Anybody can, like, in the class can go and kind of use it as notes if you miss it.
Yep.
That's the benefit of this, like, seminar approach.
Yep. Yeah, it's actually in the same playlist that this video is on my YouTube channel. It's also in the forum, in the Levinas forum. Anyone who is in the forum and doesn't primarily see these on YouTube. What are like some other points or questions from ground that we've already covered that either of you guys bears kind of digging into right now?
I don't know if it's a question or not, but it's something I had to keep reminding myself as I'm reading this text is I'm trying to remember that when Levinas is referring to the other, to the thing that is not what we would resemble as the I, it's that it's a stranger. And I keep kind of coming back to that word of fatherland. It's something that's not part of your immediate like cultural understanding of things. So to me, that makes me think, okay, when the term other comes up, that doesn't necessarily mean like other people that maybe I see day to day and that I experience as like part of a normalcy of my life, like friends or family, which we could argue are others, but they might be others in a different sense. Whereas I think Levinas is trying to say more the stranger, the thing that is not part of our homeland, our immediate like understanding of the world. And so that could be like honestly, one of the first examples I think of is just anyone who speaks a different language from you is automatically othered from your immediate world because you can't use language really to have that sense of connection. And that's something I need to keep remembering because sometimes as I'm reading, I start to think of the other as maybe someone who's maybe like a friend, but maybe I'm not understanding all the things about my friend at that moment. Or there's different ways to approach my friend, but I'm thinking, oh, wait, I think it has to be something that's like really different, something that's like, I'm not really sure about. So I wanted to see if you guys also kind of have that same understanding so far, or if you think that we can include family members, friends as part of this other that Levinas is talking about.
I think it's all of the above. I think when he's talking about the concrete other or altrui as opposed to ultra, then I actually have been harder on myself to be like, no, it's the stranger, the refugee, the this, the that. But I also think like, no, you necessarily have to do this with the people closest to you as well. or else you will instrumentalize them, and they, like your partner or your best friend or your children. Like if you don't engage with them in this way, where they are an infinity, where they are an alien, where they have the potential to surprise you, if you just take them and get them confused with their container, with their identity. And what is their identity but all the kind of predicates that you have strapped to their container? If you always just assume you know them, you fully know them, you possess them in this way, then you're gonna wind up instrumentalizing them and flattening them out as well. So yeah, I think it has to be both. You have to be able to look at the people closest to you with fresh eyes and allow them to be the other. And that can be difficult. Like, you get in a long-term relationship and it's easy to fall into patterns and take it for granted. People become props. People become safety blankets. There's a ton of relationships where one or even both of the partners aren't in that relationship anymore. They're just kind of going through the motions, and they stay together because that person is like a safety blanket. Yeah, I think it's all of them, and it has to be all of them, and it's work. It requires work to keep yourself in that. I mean, at that point, you have to inject a little bit of unfamiliarity into your close relationships. You have to remind yourself, even though I know, my closest homie, I've known him for 20 years. I know all there is to know about him as far as like demographics and life history and this and that. But he could wake up tomorrow and do something totally surprising, and that could be awesome or that could be horrible. And you have to like re-inject that into every relationship, or else you'll just take people for granted. Like, I think for the most part, like, people who know me, it's safe to assume I'm grumpy, I'm pessimistic. I would usually rather be skateboarding than doing anything else. I don't really like going out and doing fun things. So I think it's safe to assume all these things. But I don't know, every once in a while I like to put on a fancy outfit and go eat expensive food. So like, if people were just to always assume that I would rather sit at home and be a negative Nancy, maybe that'll make me really sad. Maybe I want to go out and have a fancy dinner or something every once in a while. That was a fucking retarded example, by the way, but like, what do you think, Christopher?
No, I was also thinking, like, in a sense, you could either be an other to yourself sometimes when you surprise yourself, like a slip of the tongue, or like if you hit up your partner randomly and you're like, let's book a trip to Manhattan and we're gonna have a night on the town. Like, who knows, like, what the mood will strike. And I've had moments like that. And then as for the family question, I think that's why Levinas too talks about the son, how we have the expectation that the son will be the same. But it's like, as you and Dave were saying, like, anybody who has kids, it's like, okay, like, if you're a father and you have a son, you have certain expectations. But it's like Patton Oswalt had a bit about that where he was saying he hoped his kid would like be a nerd, but he's like, my kid will probably throw my Blade Runner gun on the roof and be like, I'll pick it up if you do 50 push-ups, dweeb. And it's like, it's true though, in a sense that like your family can be another. And I think with the family, it's even more important, or the friend of the people you're closest to remember that they are still other.
Yeah.
And not to treat them. And I think you were getting into that with your partner, because it's like when you start treating them as like almost present at hand, like they're just gonna do whatever you want, whatever you need them to, that's when you start to lose people. And that friendships will dwindle, relationships, even relationships with yourself.
Yep.
And that's why it's important to kind of have that like reverence or have that respect and realize, okay, they are another person.
Hell yeah.
And I like how Levinas is taking the term, and it's like in the past, I feel like other is what people use to like dehumanize
Mm-hmm.
and like reduce them to something else, and it's like he's kind of changing the term and like flipping it on its tail, where it's like, okay, like instead of like othering somebody, like they used to during the Holocaust, like they would draw pictures of like Jews as like rats and look real bad. And it's like, no, it's like instead of doing that, othering now means like to realize like they are not a face, they're another human being who's infinite, and you have to have that. I don't want to keep using the word reverence, but kind of
Oh man,
respect
fuck
and
it.
just realize, yeah,
Yeah.
because it's almost very, he's a very religious thinker, even without always like referencing it. And I can tell that he's based in that. And it's just the language is just easy to use there. But no, I agree with both of you guys on that. I think it's where he's going. Another thing I was thinking about too, and is it's you nailed on this last week. It's always very like these thinkers when it comes to ethics and other stuff are very like person oriented and like very like human centered. And I think that's the only issue. But again, you have to kind of like build up the human being first before you can direct it elsewhere. So it's like you have to hold that love for yourself and that respect, and then for other people. And then I think after you go through this like Levinasian otherness and totality or infinity, then you can move it on to kind of like plants, animals, or earth, and like
For
things
sure.
in general.
Yeah, dude, I
So that's
think
just work on.
one thing that I don't know jumped out at me or whatever. Um there are a lot of people who seem very comfortable with the idea of subjective destitution as like a price you must pay to enter proper adulthood or subjectivity or humanness or civic whatever. Like people seem to agree with the fact that yeah, once you kind of face subjective destitution, then you really open up and you can really think and you can really feel and you can really kind of participate, if you will. And that, yeah, like for sure, I agree with that, and I feel like maybe people are comfortable with that because it's like popular, it's Lacanian, Zizek is popular, everybody loves Zizek, blah blah blah, and even I think non-Lacanians are into that shit too. But when it comes to this notion of like the infinity and allowing the infinity to be your master, or like placing yourself in this subordinate location to the idea of infinity, to me it's just like, yeah, subjective destitution. Like, and it's just a more proper filled out subjective destitution. It's like, yeah, not only is everything bullshit, but also like I'm a worm, and look at that, there's this notion of infinity, like, and this is going back to the conversation about the other, the concrete other, infinity, the blah blah blah. Like, yeah, it is this notion of infinity, of the perfect, that opens you up to being able to see that in the other. Like that is contained in the other, but the first time you really encounter it is just the broad, non-specific, non-singular notion of infinity. And I think maybe you can't see the singularity in others until you see the non-singular singularity, or this kind of infinite infinity. But like to me it's just like, okay, that's subjective destitution. And I don't know, it's not to say that people are hostile to it, but it seems to me in the conversations, especially recently, that we've had, that seems to be kind of a sticking point for some people, where they're like they're hanging up, and it's like, no, it's not like a literal you don't like Dave says, don't be the doormat. Like, it's not like you're becoming the doormat, but it is this, I think it's very akin to subjective destitution, where you realize, you know, infinity, and then you get to do to infinity and beyond. But in order to do that part, to have fun and be a human and participate in humanness, you have to first realize you're a worm, because we all start out as worms. So it's not like we're putting on our black latex gimp suits and having the other beat us with double-ended dildos. Like, it's not literal. It's just the language that gets used. But I think I started trying to hijack the question. Yeah, going back, the stranger. The stranger is your best friend. The stranger is your life partner. The stranger is your child. And they have to be, and that takes a lot of work. And I know a lot of people stay in unfulfilling relationships because they can't inject that alienness into the relationships with people that they have. But it's also hard work to see the dignity and the nobility of a person for a lot of people too. Like, there are a lot of people who, shit, dude, when we went to Iraq, there were so many guys who just didn't see the Iraqis and the TNCs as people. Like, they literally, like it was inhuman. It was disgusting. Like, it was fucking heartbreaking and horrible the way that these 18, 19, 20-year-old kids talked about Iraqi civilians, farmers, teachers, mothers, daughters, brothers, sisters, uncles, cousins, like people, human fucking beings, weren't people in these kids' eyes. So I guess for everybody, it can be difficult to recognize the nobility and the dignity of any other, because we're just so comfortable in our habitus, and we're so comfortable in our little safe spaces. And like, encountering the world can be a terrifying thing, and that's unfortunate. And that's why it's important to, like, push ourselves and say we can be better. We are not worms. I was born a worm. I will die a man. Or at least a man in progress, or a man, like, I'll die on my way to becoming one. So I'm trying to think back if there's anything else that really is jumping out at me from the first sections of the book. I know there was something, but I'm kind of drawing a blank right now. Is there anything else you think that we should hit up right now before we move into the text itself?
The only thing I wanted to touch on real quick about the doormat thing, and then I'll leave it alone for a while, is I think people are so used to ethics telling them what to do, in a sense.
Ooh.
So it's like the Kantian, like, okay, like, you got to tell the person, like, there's the neighbor, you got to give him his guns back, even if it's crazy, you know what you have to do, it's black and white. And I think Levinas, because it's so, like, non-totalized, that's where people read in the doormat bit. And it's like, no, like, you need to fill in. And it's like, almost like in Buddhism, I used to read a lot about it, but like, there's like a law in, like, some type of Buddhism where it's like you're not supposed to kill. But
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like, let's say you're a pirate and you're about to, like, kill a child or something, like, I can kill you because it would hurt you more to, like, killing that person, like, your karma or whatever. So it's like, I need to, like, stop you before you hurt yourself. And I think Levinas has room for that. So it's like, if somebody else is de-othering a person or de-othering you, doesn't mean, like, I have to be a doormat and just take it. Like, in my reverence for the person as another and beyond the face. It's like, I'm going to hold you to the same standard
Hell yeah.
and not necessarily like take that same flag. So I think you can put an interpersonal spin to it and still have that, like, okay, like almost like I remember a John Wayne quote that like all my buddies used to post. They're old school, but it's like, I will not be wronged. I will not be like laid a hand on or whatever. And I don't do those to people and I don't expect it to others. And it's like, I don't think Levinas is necessarily saying like, don't let people push you, but I think he's just allowing you the room to where it's like, I'm not just going to be stepped on, but I'm not going to step on other people, and I could still hold that respect for myself and for other people, and kind of have that like subjectivity in it, where it's like, okay, I'm going to hold you to the same standard. Maybe that's just my own interpretation or spin.
So I don't know the danger of assuming that, but I also assume that it is like, once I enter into this ethical space through recognizing your nobility, your dignity, your infinity, once I enter that space, I'm among fellow travelers. Like, I'm by seeing your humanity, I become a human. And I know Levinas is like, it's not reciprocal, it's not reversible. And I agree. I think, no, this necessarily is an asymmetrical thing, but I also do think that Levinas is like, he's laying out the ingredients for making humanness, humanality, personality, as Arendt will go on to say later. And I think it's like, yeah, once you're there, you are the type of being who acts ethically, and like recognizing that in others. Well, and he even says it back on page 84. Like, he does this thing where it's like seeing myself as the other of the other. And I think there's a lot going on right there that needs to be carefully gone over. But yeah, I think it's like, oh, I see you, I recognize you, we're both cool. And like, part of being cool is not being a shitbag. And so I can believe that you're going to be cool, but also maintaining like the stranger. Like, you have no idea. Like, you could be an axe murderer for all I know. Like, so I don't know. I think it's a delicate balance, and I definitely can't really articulate it, but I think I agree with what you're saying. And also we need to be careful. Because it's a delicate, tricky balance. One thing that you said, like taking back the language of othering, I love that, dude. Because yeah, when you talk about othering people or otherizing people, it's this exclusive thing. I think, yeah, it'd be dope if we could like, and look, I'm not saying we're gonna reclaim the word.
In a perfect world.
That's a cool point to focus on. Like, yeah, traditionally when you're talking about othering someone, you're excluding them or diminishing them. But here in this context, when you other someone, you're actually recognizing their nobility, their mastery, and that's cool. I think that's a cool, if nothing else, point of contrast, that it's fun to play with words that way. So
Sure.
So we can get into subsection C.
Okay.
Page 83, 82. 82. So Cesar is still working. We can start reading. I'll start reading, and then I'll hand off to you. And then if he's not back, then keep it going. Or we can kind of stop and hystericize if need be. But we'll go ahead and get started. Page 82, section C. Truth and Justice. Section 1. Freedom called into question. Let me big this up a little bit.
While you do that, I'll be back in 2 seconds.
Tight. Section 1. Freedom called into question. Metaphysics, or transcendence, is recognized in the work of the intellect that aspires after exteriority, that is, desire. But the desire for exteriority has appeared to us to move not in objective cognition, but in discourse, which in turn has presented itself as justice in the uprightness of the welcome made to the face. Is not the vocation to truth to which traditionally the intellect answers belied by this analysis? What is the relation between justice and truth? Truth is, in effect, not separable from intelligibility. To know is not simply to record, but always to comprehend. Just a quick little aside, that this is, I think, chapter 5 of Division 1 of being in time. Or, no, it's not Division 1. It's in Division 2. Never mind. Now I'm lost. Now I don't know what's up and what's down. But in Being in Time, when he's talking about truth being an uncovering or being a correlation or whatever, like just these first couple, or this sentence right here, truth is in effect not separable from intelligibility. I love that. Like I'm like, okay, you're definitely engaging with Heidegger. You're definitely coming in this Heideggerian like phenomenological way. And then he kind of goes off and gets crazy with justice. Justice is this idea that's crazy, right? But at the very least, I like the way he's dealing with truth. Truth is, in effect, not separable from intelligibility. I love that. To know is not simply to record, but always to comprehend. And as we remember, comprehension is like an acquisitive type of understanding, which is not necessarily bad, but it is instrumental. We comprehend so that we may move and act in and upon the world. It's not a kind of sitting back, taking part, and observing. It's a participatory type of understanding in the world, and it's an instrumental type of understanding in the world. I'm going to restart this paragraph. I'm going to try not to talk.
No, that was great, though. So, worth it.
Truth is, in effect, not separable from intelligibility. To know is not simply to record, but always to comprehend. We also say that to know is to justify, making intervene, by analogy with the moral order, the notion of justice. The justification of a fact consists in lifting from it its character of being a fact, accomplished, past, and hence irrevocable, which, as such, obstructs our spontaneity. But to say that as an obstacle to our spontaneity, a fact is unjust, is to suppose that spontaneity is not to be put in question, that free exercise is not subject to norms, but is the norm. And yet, the concern for intelligibility is fundamentally different from an attitude that engenders an action without regard for obstacles. It signifies, on the contrary, a certain respect for objects. For an obstacle to become a fact that requires a theoretical justification or a reason, the spontaneity of the action that surmounts it had to be inhibited, that is, put itself into question. It is then that we move from an activity without regard for anything to a consideration of the fact. The famous suspension of action that is said to make theory possible depends on a reserve of freedom, which does not abandon itself to its drives, to its impulsive movements, and keeps its distances. Theory, in truth, arises, is the attitude of a being that distrusts itself. Theory in which truth arises is the attitude of a being that distrusts itself. Knowing becomes knowing of a fact only if it is at the same time critical. If it puts itself into question, goes back beyond its origin in an unnatural movement to seek higher than one's own origin, a movement which evinces or describes a created freedom. This self-criticism can be understood as a discovery of one's weakness or a discovery of one's unworthiness, either as a consciousness of failure or as a consciousness of guilt. In the latter case, to justify freedom is not to prove it, but to render it just.
The predominance of a tradition that subordinates unworthiness to failure, moral generosity itself to the necessities of objective thought, is perceivable in European thought. The spontaneity of freedom is not called in question. Its limitation alone is held to be tragic and to constitute a scandal. Freedom is called into question only in so much as it somehow finds itself imposed upon itself. If I could have freely chosen my own existence, everything would be justified. The failure of my spontaneity still bereft of reason, awakens reason. End theory. There would have been a suffering that would be the mother of wisdom. From failure alone would come the necessity of curbing violence and introducing order into human relations. Political theory derives justice from the undiscussed value of spontaneity. Its problem is to ensure, by way of knowledge of the world, the most complete exercise of spontaneity by reconciling my freedom with the freedom of others. This position admits not only the undiscussed value of spontaneity, but also the possibility of a rational being situated within the totality. The critique of spontaneity engendered by failure, which calls in question the central place the I occupies in the world, implies that empowered to reflect on its failure and on the totality, an uprooting of the I torn up from itself and living in the universal. It founds neither theory nor truth. It presupposes them. It proceeds from knowledge of the world. Is already born from the knowledge of failure. The consciousness of failure is already theoretical. The critique of spontaneity, engendered by the consciousness of moral unworthiness, on the contrary, precedes truth, precedes the consideration of the whole, and does not imply the sublimation of the I in the universe. The consciousness of unworthiness is not in its turn a truth, is not a consideration of facts. The first consciousness of my immorality, thought it was immortality, is not my subordination to facts, but to the other, to the infinite. The idea of totality and the idea of infinity differ precisely in that the first is purely theoretical, but the second is moral. I remember underlining that when I was reading too. Felt like that was just an important note. The freedom that can be ashamed of itself founds truth, and thus truth is not deduced from truth. The other is not initially a fact, is not an obstacle, does not threaten me with death. He is desired in my shame. To discover the unjustified facticity of power and freedom, one must not consider it as an object, nor consider the other as an object. One must measure oneself against infinity, that is, desire him. It is necessary to have the idea of infinity, the idea of perfection, as Descartes would say, in order to know one's own imperfection. The idea of the perfect is not an idea, but desire. It is the welcoming of the other, the commencement of moral consciousness, which calls in question my freedom. Thus, the way of measuring oneself against the perfection of infinity is not a theoretical consideration, it is accomplished as shame, where freedom discovers itself murderous in its very exercise. It is accomplished in shame, where freedom at the same time is discovered in the consciousness of shame and is concealed in the shame itself. Shame does not have the structure of consciousness and clarity. It is oriented in the inverse direction. Its subject is exterior to me. Discourse and desire, where the other presents himself as interlocutor, as him over whom I cannot have power, whom I cannot kill, condition this shame, where qua I am not innocent in spontaneity, but usurper and murderer. Contrawise, a theoretical idea of another myself is not adequate to the infinite, to the other as other, already for the simple reason that he provokes my shame and presents himself as dominating me. His justified existence is the primary fact, the synonym of his very perfection. And if the other can invest me and invest my freedom of itself arbitrary, This is in the last analysis because I myself can feel myself to be the other of the other. But this comes about only across very complex structures. We're on page 84. So
I myself can feel myself to be the other of the other. But this comes about only across very complex structures. That, yeah, dude. I think that's like a pivotal fucking clause. And like I think it kind of maybe deals with this question of mastery, subordination, and the like the focus on the words themselves. I do think it's like, no, we're all masters. We're all each other's masters. And when everyone's a master, then no one's a master. Look at that. We did it. No God, no masters. But seriously, like I do think that gets us out of that conundrum. But this comes about only across very complex structures. I feel like that is doing so much heavy lifting, very complex structures, which is why it's not reversible. It's not mathematically reciprocal, but it's still like a participatory thing. You just can't reduce it down to this one for one. So I hope somebody writes about that, because we've had a lot of conversation and discussion about this, the symmetry, the asymmetry, and I feel like this is addressing that. So or I don't know, maybe not, I don't know. You want to roll on it, Cesar, or you want to?
Yeah, let's see. It's this last paragraph on page 84.
Yep.
Before number 2.
Yep.
All right. Conscious welcomes the other. It is the revelation of a resistance to my powers that does not counter them as a greater force, but calls in question the naive right of my powers, my glorious spontaneity as a living being. Morality begins when freedom, instead of being justified by itself, feels itself to be arbitrary and violent. The search for the intelligible and the manifestation of the critical essence of knowing, the movement of a being back to what precedes condition, begin together. Part 2, the investiture of freedom or critique. Existence is not in reality condemned to freedom, but is invested as freedom. Freedom is not bare. To philosophize is to trace freedom back to what lies before it, to disclose the investiture that liberates freedom from the arbitrary. Knowledge as a critique, as a tracing back to what precedes freedom, can arise only in a being that has an origin prior to its origin, that is created. And then there's the French translation of it below. Critique or philosophy is the essence of knowing. But what is proper to knowing is not its possibility of going unto an object, a movement by which it is akin to other acts. Its prerogative consists in being able to put itself in question, in penetrating beneath its own condition. It is not drawn back from the world because it has the world as its object. It can have the world as its theme, make of it an object, because its exercise consists, as it were, in taking charge of the very condition that supports it, and that supports even this very act of taking charge.
What is the meaning of this taking charge, this penetration beneath one's condition, first dissimulated by the naive movement that conducts cognition as an act toward its object. What is the meaning of this calling in question? It cannot be reduced to the repetition with regard to cognition as a whole of the questions that are raised for the understanding of the things aimed at in the naive act of cognition. In that case, to know knowledge would amount to elaborating a psychology which has its place among the other sciences that bear upon objects. The critical question raised in psychology or in theory of knowledge would amount to asking, for example, from what certain principle cognition is derived, or what is its cause. Infinite regression would here be indeed inevitable, and it is to this sterile course that the proceeding back beneath one's condition, the power to pose the problem of the foundation, would be reduced. The power to pose the problem. To identify the problem of the foundation with an objective knowledge of knowledge is to suppose in advance that freedom can be founded only on itself. For freedom, the determination of the other by the same is the very movement of representation and of its evidence. To identify the problem of foundation with the knowledge of knowledge is to forget the arbitrariness of freedom, which is precisely what has to be grounded. The knowing whose essence is critique cannot be reduced to objective cognition. It leads to the other. To welcome the other is to put in question my freedom. But the critical essence of knowing also leads us beyond the knowledge of the cogito, which we may wish to distinguish from objective knowledge. The evidence of the cogito, where knowledge and the known coincide without knowledge having had to be already in operation, where knowledge thus involves no commitment prior to its present commitment, is at each instant at the beginning, is not in situation, which, moreover, is what is proper to all evidence, a pure experience of the present without condition or past, cannot satisfy the critical exigency, for the commencement of the cogito remains antecedent to it. It does indeed mark commencement, because it is the awakening of an existence that takes charge of its own condition. But this awakening comes from the other. Before the cogito, existence dreams itself, as though it remained foreign to itself. It is because it suspects that it is dreaming itself that it awakens. The doubt makes it seek certainty. But this suspicion, this consciousness of doubt, implies the idea of the perfect. The knowing of the cogito thus refers to a relation with the master, with the idea of infinity or of the perfect. The idea of infinity is neither the immanence of the I think, nor the transcendence of the object. The cogito in Descartes rests on the other who is God, and who has put the idea of infinity in the soul, who had taught it, and has not, like the Platonic master, simply aroused the reminiscence of former visions. As the act unsettling its own condition, knowing comes into play above all action. And if the tracking back from a condition to what precedes that condition describes the status of the creature, in which the uncertainty of freedom and its recourse to justification are bound up, if knowing is a creature activity, this unsettling of the condition and this justification come from the other. The other alone eludes thematization. Thematization cannot serve to found thematization, for it supposes it to be already founded. It is the exercise of a freedom sure of itself and its naive spontaneity, whereas the presence of the other is not equivalent to his thematization, and consequently does not require this naive and self-sure spontaneity. The welcoming of the other is ipso facto the consciousness of my own injustice, the shame that freedom feels for itself. If philosophy consists in knowing critically, that is, in seeking a foundation for its freedom, in justifying it, it begins with conscience, to which the other is presented as the other, and where the movement of thematization is inverted. But this inversion does not amount to knowing oneself as a theme attended to by the other, but rather in submitting oneself to an exigency, to a morality. The other measures me with a gaze incomparable to the gaze by which I discover him. The dimension of height in which the other is placed is as it were the primary curvature of being from which the privilege of the other results. The gradient of transcendence. The other is metaphysical. The other is not transcendent because he would be free as I am. On the contrary, his freedom is a superiority that comes from his very transcendence. What does this inversion of critique consist in? The subject is for itself. It represents itself and knows itself as long as it is. But in knowing or representing itself, it possesses itself, dominates itself, extends its identity to what of itself comes to refute this identity. This imperialism of the same is the whole essence of freedom. The for itself as a mode of existence designates an attachment to oneself as radical and as radical as a naive will to live. But if freedom situates me effrontedly before the non-me in myself and outside of myself, if it consists in negating or possessing the non-me, before the other it retreats. The relationship with the other does not move, as does cognition, into enjoyment and possession, into freedom. The other imposes himself as an exigency that dominates this freedom, and hence as more primordial than everything that takes place in me. The other, whose exceptional presence is inscribed in the ethical impossibility of killing him in which I stand, marks the end of powers. If I can no longer have power over him, it is because he overflows absolutely every idea I can have of him. Damn, there was a lot there.
The I can indeed, to justify itself, enter upon a different course. It can endeavor to apprehend itself within a totality. This seems to us to be the justification of freedom, aspired after by the philosophy that from Spinoza to Hegel identifies will and reason that, contrary to Descartes, removes from truth its character of being a free work so as to situate it where the opposition between the I and the non-I disappears. In an impersonal reason, freedom is not maintained but reduced to being the reflection of a universal order which maintains itself and justifies itself all by itself, like the God of the ontological argument. This privilege of the universal order, that it sustains itself and justifies itself, which situates it beyond the still subjective work of the Cartesian will, constitutes the divine dignity of this order. Knowing would be the way by which freedom would denounce its own contingency, by which it would vanish into the totality. In reality, this way dissimulates the ancient triumph of the same over the other. If freedom thus ceases to maintain itself in the arbitrariness of the solitary certitude of evidence, and if the solitary is united in the impersonal reality of the divine, the I disappears in this sublimation. For the philosophical tradition of the West, every relation between the same and the other, when it is no longer an affirmation of the supremacy of the same, reduces itself to an impersonal relation within a universal order. Philosophy itself is identified with the substitution of ideas for persons. The theme for the interlocutor, the interiority of the logical relation for the exteriority of the interpolation. Existence are reduced to the neuter state of the idea, being the concept. It was to escape the arbitrariness of freedom, its disappearance in the neuter, that we've approached the I as atheist and created free, but capable of tracing back beneath its condition before the other, who does not deliver himself in the thematization of conceptualization of the other. To wish to escape dissolution into the neuter, to posit knowing as a welcoming of the other, is not a pious attempt to maintain the spiritualism of a personal God, but is the condition for language, without which philosophical discourse itself is but an abortive act, a pretext for an unintermitting psychoanalysis or theology or sociology, in which the appearance of a discourse vanishes in the whole. Speaking implies a possibility of breaking off and beginning. To posit everything as the very existing of the creature, as the tracing back beyond the condition to the other that found, is to separate oneself from a whole philosophical tradition that sought the foundation of the self in the self outside of the heteronomous opinions. We think that existence for itself is not the ultimate meaning of knowing, but rather the putting back into question of the self, the turning back to what is prior to oneself. In the presence of the other, a privileged heteronomy does not clash with freedom, but invests. The shame for oneself, the presence of a desire for the other, are not the negation of knowing. Knowing is their very articulation. The essence of reason consists not in securing for man a foundation and powers, but in calling him in question and inviting him to justice. Metaphysics, therefore, does not consist in bending over the for itself of the I to seek in it the solid ground for an absolute approach to being. It is not in the know thyself that is the ultimate movement is pursued. Not that the for itself be limited or be of bad faith, but because by itself it is only freedom that is arbitrary and unjustified, and in this sense detestable. It is I egoism. To be sure, the atheism of the I marks the break with participation, and consequently the possibility of seeking a justification for oneself that is a dependence upon an exteriority, without this dependence absorbing the dependent being held in invisible meshes. This dependence consequently at the same time maintains independence. Such is the face-to-face relation. In the quest for truth, a work eminently individual, which always as Descartes saw, comes back to the freedom of the individual. Atheism affirms itself as atheism, but its critical power takes its beneath its freedom. The unity of spontaneous freedom, working on straight ahead, and critique, where freedom is capable of being called in question and thus preceding itself, is what is termed a creature. The marvel of creation does not only consist in being a creation ex nihilo, but in that it results in a being capable of receiving a revelation, learning that it is created and putting oneself in question. The miracle of creation lies in creating moral being, and this implies precisely atheism, but at the same time beyond atheism, shame for arbitrariness of the freedom that constitutes it.
I think I'll finish this off into then it'll lead into the next section, but maybe we could review everything we talked about so far.
Yeah, man.
We therefore are also radically opposed to Heidegger, who subordinates the relation with the other to ontology, which, moreover, he determines as though the relation with the interlocutor and the master could be reduced to it. Rather than seeing in justice and injustice a primordial access to the other beyond all ontology. The existence of the other does not concern us in the collectivity by reason of his participation in the being that is already familiar to us all, nor by reason of his power and freedom, which we should have to subjugate and utilize for ourselves, nor by virtue of the difference of his attributes, which we would have to surmount in the process of cognition or in a movement of sympathy merging us with him, as though his existence were an embarrassment. The other does not affect us as to what must be surmounted, enveloped, dominated, but as other, independent of us. Behind every relation we could sustain with him an absolute upsurge. It is this way of welcoming an absolute existent that we discover injustice and injustice, and that discourse essentially teaching effectuates. The term welcome of the other expresses a simultaneity of activity and passivity, which places the relation with the other outside of the dichotomies valid for things, the a priori and the a posteriori, activity, and passivity. But we wish to show also how, starting from knowing identified with thematization, the truth of this knowing leads back to the relation with the other, that is, to justice. For the sense of our whole effort is to contest the ineradicable conviction of every philosophy that objective knowledge is the ultimate relation of transcendence, that the other, though he be different from the things, must be known objectively, even if his freedom should deceive this nostalgia for knowledge. The sense of our whole effort lies in affirming not that the other forever escapes knowing, but that there is no meaning in speaking here of knowledge or ignorance. For justice, the preeminent transcendence, and the condition for knowing, is a nowise, as one would like a noesis correlative of a noema. Okay, so explain that to me.
I think Levinas is like asking what is truth, and he's answering by, well, truth is like correct interpretation. Like it's something in the world that you discover, and it's also correct. Like correct, like that's a weird word to use there, but like it's a true thing that you discover and interpret. Like it's where the truth is inseparable from understanding, or what knowing is inseparable from truth or whatever. But he's also like, so he's doing that. He's saying truth is this thing, and it's like a feature of the way we perceive and interact with the world. And from that we get the notion of justice, because like for truth you have correctness, but correctness also implies justice, and it's like, well, I'm free and I can do this with my body, but in my doing this with my body I can also hit you on the nose. And we might be like the little child who's upset. Like I saw a video of a little kid who was pulling dollar bills out of his little Pokemon wallet, and like his mom bought him a toy, and then she told him, you have to reimburse me. And he was all happy. He's like, yeah, I got a toy. But then when he realized that she was taking his money, he got really upset about it. And he was like, you made me go broke. So like we can do that, and we can throw the fit about the world placing us in this destitute position. And we can think of it as unjust. Like, oh, wait a minute, I can move my arms. I should be able to move my arms wherever I want, regardless of if they hit you on the head or not. That it's unjust that I have to be considerate of you and actually think about the consequences of my actions. And that is the mind state of the worm, or the human larva. And it's like that. Like he's calling into question the notion of justice and what is justice. And then he's also going off, or not, and then he goes off and he's talking about like, so I get lost here when he's talking about the creation and the creator. I get what he's saying. Like it's not this, knowledge is not this anamnesis. It's not like the teacher reminding you of the thing. Like there are things out there to be discovered as far as truth is concerned. But the notion of like the creator is like, to me, I was like, it almost felt like, I was like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense, because he seems to be doing this thing where there is no appeal to to the creator or the objective. Like Levinas is not making this appeal, but I felt like he was doing that when I was reading this part about the creator. I don't know. Like what did you guys get from that?
You want to go, Christopher, or should I?
You can go first.
All right. I don't remember going over anything like the creator, but
Oh,
also I came in kind of late. So
I also that might
maybe
come in later, by the way.
Well, he talked about like the creature and then creation ex nihilo. I don't know if that's what you were on 89 at the top. The marvel of creation does not only consist in being a creation ex nihilo. So that's what I don't know if
Okay.
that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, I think it
Sorry
was.
to interrupt.
Sorry. Yeah.
no. Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is that maybe those words didn't stand out to me of all the different kinds of like words he throws out at us. Um I mean I'll what I was thinking is I'll just kind of read maybe some of these things that I highlighted that really stood out to me, maybe give my own little quick little quip about it, and then maybe we could see which one seems more interesting to like discuss a little bit more in depth. So the first one is page 86, kind of in the middle. It says I highlighted the idea of infinity is neither the immanence of the I think nor the transcendence of the object. The cogito in Descartes rests on the other who is God. Um, so what I kind of took that as is that maybe what is to be recognized about Descartes' questioning is not even this thing of like the I think therefore I am statement, but first looking at the presupposition of God, he's responding to God first, like as questioning himself, kind of knowing that first God is present to make his questioning happen. Um, so that's
So
kind of what I'm taking from it.
like that Descartes is taking God for granted.
Yeah, I guess another way to put this is that we could say Descartes is this is his one of his base assumptions
Mhm.
of how his line of questioning goes. Um, and so Levinas is like, well, look at that. Like, uh, even Descartes has an other when he's talking about the I think,
Gotcha.
therefore I am.
Yeah, and
Uh,
yeah,
so
yeah.
he hasn't even escaped the I himself as being only an I.
Yeah. Well, and that is like Levinas is saying like, no, it is this other that calls you into question that precedes the I. Like yeah, Descartes is taking God as a given. He's bracketed God out, and he isn't even aware of it. He's tried to be this radical skeptic of everything, but he forgot to doubt God. And not only did he forget to doubt God, but it's only because he has this other. There is the possibility for the I in the first place. Yeah.
Or maybe we could even say Levinas. I don't know. This might be too big of a stretch, but Levinas would say we only can think of this thing called the I because first there has to be an other that makes us even question, oh, I'm an I now. I have my own subjectivity in a way.
I think that's right. And then I think too, it's him kind of like showing where the idea of an infinity comes from, which is always the other. So I see where you're tracking with that. And he's big on like critiquing the mimesis, like the Socratic with the Maieutic, where it's you already have the knowledge and it brings it out in you, and it's like it's almost even like it's not in you, it's in the other that is the infinite. But it is also in you when you are the other. But it's kind of like that's kind of like a given, that back and forth, like dialectical or relational. And I think Levinas is kind of guilty, but I think he's right in doing it. Where I had an ethics professor who didn't like Descartes because he said that Descartes had like wanted to prove God from the beginning in his work and was like pretending to be skeptical. And I think Levinas kind of does the same thing, but it's like just a given, like phenomenologically speaking, like Levinas is just like we can't get around it. So he's just trying to highlight that aspect. And then I just wanted to comment real quick on the creation ex nihilo thing. I think he covers more of that in existence and existence. I haven't read it yet, but he was talking about it in an interview. And that part too is kind of lost on me, but he keeps talking about this like non-space Levinas and his other works. And I don't want to like create a huge sidebar, but I think he's like fleshing it out a little bit, and maybe he will later, where he talks about this like it's Ilya,
Ilya,
and he
there
calls
is.
yeah Ilya, and he talks about like no matter what, even if there's nothing, it exists as a there because you can't refer to nothing at all. And
Yeah,
I
dude.
think he might. I think he's trying to say that with the ex nihilo, like it's this shit didn't come out of a vacuum. Existence is kind of like a given in a sense. That's what I'm getting out of it.
So
I could be wrong.
I like to like maintain my nihilism. And I do think Levinas would be totally okay with me being this nihilist. And it's like you reach this point where it's like, yeah, well, we're already here, so we could like sit around and argue over how we got here, why we came, or whether or not we're even really here, or if we're just dreaming. We could do that, and there may be something to be gained. But we could also like agree to try to be productive and just deal with the fact that we are here. And I like that. And I do think that's what tripped me up. The language that he uses, the fact that he's talking about God and creation ex nihilo and the creator. That language always does jump out at me. Like I'm still a recovering edgy internet atheist from 10, 15 years ago.
Same.
But yeah, like I think he is doing this thing where he's like, yeah, I mean, if you want to call it God, that's cool. If you want to just call it like the facticity of our existence, that's also cool. But we have to agree that we are already here. And Descartes was doing this thing where Descartes thought, well, we have to agree that I am here. And Levinas is saying, well, now hold on. What's really happening is that we are here and that there is a here in the first place. And that should be the ground. Like that should be the basement or the foundation for us to build this castle. But Descartes got out ahead of himself and he started building the lobby. And so, yeah, I think that's what's going on here. It's like, damn, I wish he used better language, but also I think it's awesome. And I don't care that he says God and creator, because I don't feel like he's beating me over the head with God and the idea of creation and stuff.
It's not like you're reading like Aquinas or something where that language will just completely like throw you. Like there's good shit in that too, but it's like he's not doing an ontological argument. And I think he says that somewhere else in the reading, if I remember. But no, I agree with all that. I think it's a great passage too that Cesar picked out, because it kind of like jump starts and kind of is connecting the dots for me a little bit better. And it's like he said, I think it was Cesar who said it, that the other as God, like putting the idea of infinity, like Descartes is already presupposing somebody else. And it's like Levinas is like, see,
Yeah.
I'm not alone here. Even like the biggest skeptic did the same. So, good shit.
I mean, I have other notes
Let's do
from
it,
this
dude.
whole passage,
Let's do
but
it.
I don't know. I don't know what you guys, if you guys want to,
Yeah, I'm
if you
down.
want to have like a certain quota of like reading you want to do, or
We
if
don't
you
need
want
no
to like,
stinking quotas.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, let's
Books
do
aren't
it,
going
man.
anywhere.
Well, just like keeping in mind, Mandy's here in the chat, Dave's here in the chat there, but like all of us that are like in this course and kind of reading this together, like we're all here to kind of lean on each other and shit. So the more into the weeds we can get, or like the more like granular we can be, I think ultimately the bigger benefit we're gonna have to everybody, not just us. So yeah, if you have to choose between pushing on to finish the race or kind of staying in place to really figure out where you currently are, we should always figure out where we are.
Okay, I feel the same. So yeah, actually this little sentence or two sentences, on page 87 in the middle. This is one of the biggest maybe contentions I have with Levinas, in terms of I'm not really sure. I'm not sure if I feel convinced yet of uh where his reasoning is, or his explanation, or what follows from what he says. And so it has to do with basically, why should you care about the other? You know? Um, so he has these two sentences in the middle of page 87, and it goes, "The other, whose exceptional presence is inscribed in the ethical impossibility of killing him in which I stand, marks the end of powers. If I can no longer have power over him, it is because he overflows absolutely every idea I can have of him." So for me, it's like, okay, I get that in some sense of there's this overflowing of the other, that metaphysical big O other
Mm.
that we can never, I guess, really tap into. I've been kind of thinking of it as like virtual space versus like um this reality space of like physical matter, where the virtual is like so much more vast, because it hasn't yet been expressed into material like flesh, you know. Um, and so if we all kind of have a virtualness to us, um, I'm not really sure, or I'm still not convinced of like then why we would want to care about the other necessarily. And maybe that has a thinking to do of what if we don't care about ourselves enough to care about the other? Um, and so I'm not sure if Levinas will get around to that, but I feel like I haven't felt that so
Mm.
far in the things that we've read. And yeah, I'm just open to like what his idea might be, or like what, and also what you guys think his idea might be of why should we care?
I think like later, like as he's talking about conscience, as he's talking about guilt and shame, and he's like maybe talking about the how as opposed to the why.
Mhm.
I think, yeah, dude, but I do think the why, I don't know, maybe the why can get lost, but I think he's saying like even going back to, I don't know, like the first few sections when he's saying like we are the animal that like we can do this. Like we can stand up, we can stand on our own, and we can do all of this. But like it's this asymmetry between like can and should. I feel like he's like this is a tautology. Like the ought and the is are the same question. I feel like, because he's just like, it's there. Like you have this sense. Like this is what separates us from apes. This sense, this capacity. And that is why. Which I don't know, like it does feel kind of like, so who gives a shit? Or like, oh, that's bullshit. Like it does, it kind of feels like you could do that.
And it sounds like he's arguing that in, I think, the next page, what I also focused on was he's talking about this idea of the for itself. And he, like, isn't that like the Sartrean term? And then he also mentions know thyself, this Socrates term. Um, and then also mentions like this thing that is called, I guess, like atheism is the I, is the egoism, the break with participation. Um, and I think and so then let me read what he says right there of at kind of towards the bottom of page 88. Metaphysics, therefore, does not consist in bending over the for itself of the I to seek in it the solid ground for an absolute approach to being. It is not in the know thyself that its ultimate movement is pursued. Not that the for itself be limited or be of bad faith, but because by itself it is only freedom that is arbitrary and unjustified, and in this sense detestable. So I guess he's kind of doing an interesting thing. It was like, yeah, when you say you're an I, you are expressing freedom, but is that it's not justified? Or maybe the word I would use would be it's not challenged.
yeah,
Like
it's not real, because it is this solipsistic, even Cartesian mode of like me. Like I feel like Levinas is taking down the modern individual, like the political individual, the liberal
20th
subject, the
century
20th
individual
century.
too.
Yeah. And he's doing this thing where and he's like, look, that's all true. Like, yeah, it's all true. And like functionally in our day-to-day lives, we are these individuals, and we do go through the world this way, and we can stand up on our own, and we can do all this. But earlier he's like, but that freedom is, what is that? That freedom is violent, and whatever he said. But yeah, it's unjustified. You're doing a solipsism when you're only concerned with this. And I think it is kind of easy to think, well, yeah, but so what? And that's the point. Levinas is like, that's the point. Like, we luminous beings are we, Luke. Like it, he is saying like, no, we are these beautiful, virtual, purposive creatures. Like there are infinities. We contain multitudes. That's why it matters. And you can call it God. You can make recourse to God, which he resists. Or you can just be like, oh, we find ourselves already here in this like condition of being capable of, tremendous acts of grace and humanity. And we all know suffering. We all know what it feels like to suffer and to live in unpleasant conditions. And if there's a way that we can avoid it, we should, because we know subjectively that it sucks to live in a shitty world. So when we are exercising our individual freedom, we have to take into account the consequences of our actions, or else we might be putting other people in these situations where they're like, damn, it really sucks that I live in this shitty world. I don't know, man. And I think it gets very slippery. I can't fucking say it, but I think I know it. But also, I think that's what Levinas is getting at. He's like, no, it's inside you, and it's this real thing. So stop trying to cut it apart. Stop trying to lay it on the fucking rack and dissect it, as Francis Bacon would have us do, or modernity itself would have us do. Kind of instrumentalize everything. Stop trying to comprehend everything, and allow yourself to honor that inner sense, which can be confused with mysticism and woo-woo and crystal powers and this and that. Or it can also be honored as this, like, we all know what it's like to feel awesome. We all know what it's like to feel like, you know, the world just took a fat dump on your chest. And like, that should be enough that we could to build an ethics upon, like, oh, we are sentient. We are conscious. We have consciouses. We have the potential to be called out by the other. And the guilt and shame is not so much this subjective inward, like, I feel so much guilt and shame, but it's like an indicator of like, oh, you fucked that dude over. And now that dude has a shitty situation because you did something, because you were so self-obsessed. I think, but that's stupid. That's not satisfying. Like, I want to get to the point where I can explain it in, 500 words and people would be like, oh yeah, that's cool. Because I know I sound like an idiot when I'm trying to just be like, yeah, man, it's cool. Like, just be cool. Like, but it is like that. It's like, just be cool, dude. Just be cool. Fucking shitty people suck.
Yeah, like, let's see. One of the last things I highlighted from this section maybe relates to what you're talking about. And it's at the bottom of page 89. And it was this kind of little cup, or I guess it's all just one sentence actually. For the sense of our whole effort is to contest the ineradicable conviction of every philosophy that objective knowledge is the ultimate relation of transcendence, that the other, though he be different from the things, must be known objectively. So what I see Levinas saying in that is that what he's trying to do is contest this, that we should know the other objectively. Or he's saying philosophy has that conviction of what it wants to do. And maybe Levinas is basically saying, no, you can't do that. Or like, I'm going to make a fuss about this. I'm going to say that you can actually not have this objective, already cookie cutter way of looking at the other. And I guess maybe that relates to, Nance, what you were just saying about trying to like have a good disposition towards someone else, and kind of having that sense, that almost like having that sense before we even know about it, before we've even categorized it in a dissected way of looking at these things. It's a visceral reaction that we have. And then yeah, it's curious because then I don't know, it's just that other thinkers also kind of have their way of thinking about what are the reasons why we even feel empathy or have these reactions. And some of them could maybe have a little bit more of a well, I guess for lack of a better word, cynical approach to why we feel these things. Um, like, I don't know, you could say from a very simplistic evolutionary biology perspective, it's because it's not in our species interest or something to blah blah blah. But I don't know, even maybe even some you could even say psychoanalytic perspective, certain schools of thought could lean into, well, we only feel this thing not because we're actually empathetic, but because I don't know, we didn't get satisfaction. We didn't fulfill our desire or something with that interaction. Um, so it's to me it is interesting of like Levinas being like, well, I'm just gonna say no, I'm against that. You know, and she's like, well, okay. That's an interesting place to stand.
I think
It's like he's ground. I'm sorry.
go no, yeah, go for it.
Okay. I was just gonna say, in that theory of intuition book you showed me about Husserl, Levinas was kind of saying that like a lot of people got Husserl wrong because they thought he was doing like a very natural, like naturalism was the big like idea that you could reduce everything to that like scientific materialism, and both Husserl and Levinas, even Heidegger, were all against that. And I think that quote and what Nance was saying and Cesar, like you both nailed that on the head. And it's almost like he's trying to say like he's grounding ethics in kind of like a phenomenological sense, and like this is just the way it is because this is how it is. Like
Mhm.
it's circular, but it's not, in a sense. Like if you're in that scientific disposition and you have that hat on, you're gonna think it's circular. But he's kind of like doing that phenomenological like hermeneutics because he's just describing what the situation is, what the other evokes in you. And he's like, everybody now is kind of like, even our tradition today is still steeped in that. Like you were saying, like evolutionary psychology is trying to objectify everything. Like, oh, I remember that it was big in my college when I was getting my psych degree. And they were talking about like your paternal grandmother would be more likely to like be better to the kids than like the maternal one, or the maternal one would. And so I forget which it was. And I was like, well, that's weird because like my paternal one like abandoned us, and like the paternal one because of the gene selection. And it's like just kind of like coloring the study in there. That anything that doesn't fit into that is just an outlier. And it's like, no, man, like it doesn't have to be that deep. Like it's literally just the situation, like the infinity of the other and just reverence for other people and realizing like, oh shit, we're all human beings. I feel better when I'm not a piece of shit. Like he talks about, I think he talks about. Did we already go over shame, or is that later in the reading? Because I
I
know he
can't
talks about
remember.
shame,
I think he
and it's
introduced
like,
it, but he didn't really get into it, I
yeah,
think.
most people feel like pieces of shit when you're an asshole. Like if I cut you off while you were speaking right now and talked for an hour and a half later tonight, I'd be like, why the fuck did I do that? You know what I mean? Like not evolutionary, like now I'm gonna be exiled from the group and I'm gonna starve to death. So I just think he's writing in that whole context in a sense. And yeah, no, I agree. I agree with y'all.
Is it Richard Dawkins who wrote The Selfish Gene?
Yeah.
I think I mean I do think there's a lot to that, but I also think a lot of it's kind of post hoc to
Hmm.
justify um this need to account for every last little thing in this very mathematical way that gets turned into
Algorithmic, like you were saying.
objective. Yeah, well, it becomes algorithmic reproduction, but it's like this the fetishization of the notion of objectivity. And I think even like that's even they got the wrong starting point when they started trying to decide what is objective and what is subjective. But it's very mathematic, it's very instrumental. Um and there are people who just need it. I think that's why I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, it became popular to do the "Are we living in a simulation?" thing. And people took Nick Bostrom's work. Nick Bostrom is a computer scientist who I think he's pretty interesting. But people took his work, and I think they went nuts with it, and they were like, "You see, we actually live in a simulation." And Elon Musk was like, "Well, I think we live in a simulation." Anyway, but like people started doing that because they were popular, successful, modern liberal individuals. And to be the successful modern liberal individual, you can't believe in God. But because they still have this like incessant drive to account for all the facts, because their brain has been corrupted by the logic of capital, which demands an accounting of everything because it is nothing but a fucking algorithm. 1 + 1 always has to equal 2, and you can't have emergent threes. Like their brain is stuck in that little logic of capital box. And so they're like, well, I can't have God, and so I need this other thing called objectivity. And then they do the scientism thing and this and that. And yeah, man, like Heidegger, I think, which I hate the fact that I keep bringing up Heidegger, even though it's super relevant. I keep bringing him up, and the more and more I think about it, like the more I want to apologize for some of the seemingly dismissive comments I've made about Heidegger. But like Heidegger, like totally destroys this
He was
need.
a dick, so it's okay.
Yeah, he was. Fuck him. He was a bitch ass Nazi, dude. Fuck that guy. But we shouldn't dismiss him intellectually. He I think he totally destroys this like the need for that like mathematized accounting system. And I mean, Levinas brings it up to the alien accounting system. But yeah, I think probably in History of the Concept of Time would be a good place to start for anyone who's interested in Heidegger dissembling like the inframing of everything via modernity, or yeah, modernity itself. So that was a long-winded ramble on my part. But yeah, like I do think Levinas is just unabashedly doing this thing where he's like, no, I know it, and you know it, and I know you know it. And if you're going to pretend like you don't know it, you're a little worm. And if you want to rise above your warmality, stop being a bitch and just accept this thing that we all know. And we all know. And it is what it is.
I know you know that you know that I know. You know?
Yeah, dude.
Bitch.
Bitch ass worm.
It's funny you keep mentioning worms. The worm to converting to a human. Because instantly my mind goes to human centipede, you know?
Dude, I haven't seen it. Have you seen it, the movie?
No, but just going along
Just
with your
watch the South
metaphor of
Park.
like, I'm gonna go from centipede to human centipede.
Yeah,
That's my
dude.
goal in life.
That's what we're doing at Theory Underground. 5 years from now, all of us are just gonna be in a weird fucked up room, and we're gonna be human centipede, and like Mikey's gonna be at the head, and he's gonna talk for 6 days about all the books we read, and we're gonna be like, this is satisfying.
And I'll be at the tail end.
Yeah, so I think it is like Levinas is saying, yeah, there's this quality that separates us from the base animals, and it is this quality which I am discussing, and he's presenting a case for it, but he's not necessarily doing like a cosmic justification or like a cosmic accounting of it. Because that's the project. Like at the time, like that was it. Like Husserl, Heidegger, like they were kind of reacting to this scientism, the scientismification of everything.
It just sucks because like they were writing against like the positivists, and it's like I think they all make great points, but I feel like they lost at least like the ideology war in that
Oh,
sense. Because like today, like we're still caught in that whole.
well, dude, it's crazy, and this is totally tangential, but it is fucking
Yeah.
crazy if you take Heidegger seriously to see where he wound up anyway. Because it is like it is this logic of capital that they're kind of railing against, but like Heidegger gets carried away in this movement that was so convenient for capital. I mean, there's other, there's particular features of it that make it specific to the time and place, but ultimately it is kind of just an ideological expression of capital wanting to do this in framing, like hyper in framing. Like it's not, anyway, yeah, I'm rambling.
I just think it's important to point out because it's like I hate justifying why I'm doing something, but it's like why this text from like the 1960s is still pertinent and why like what we're doing
More than ever
matters.
before, dude. More than ever before.
Just my little commercial I wanted to throw in.
So was that satisfying, Cesar, or no?
No, it
No.
wasn't. I mean, it was only like satisfying enough, but the itch remains. I
Yeah.
feel like
Always will.
I haven't really, well, as Levinas says, I haven't gone through the revelation of it. Maybe it's been disclosed to me a little bit, but not the actual revelation that like where I feel it, you know?
Hmm.
More just like my questions of like, okay, I'm still gonna be open to why should I care about the other? Like in other words, why is what Levinas is proposing better than atheism, as he would say it. Um, but I mean, it's just like keeping an open question of it, you know? It's um also I want to correct myself because in the discussion from last week, the only question I got around to was I was asking, okay, Levinas has this like little subchapter called Metaphysics Precedes Ontology. And then I mentioned at the very end of that subsection, I was like, wait, but I'm confused because he ends it by saying ontology presupposes metaphysics. And I was thinking of the word presupposes as the same as precedes. So
Hmm.
I was getting it mixed up. I was like, hold on, he says one thing as his chapter heading, and then he ends it with the flip. Um, but ultimately, he was saying metaphysics first, ontology follows from that. And that's what he means by ontology presupposes metaphysics, parentheses first.
Yeah.
And I only remember that correction of because this next chapter heading is called Truth Presupposes Justice. So for him, justice is first, and then you get truth from that, which is interesting.
It is interesting.
So should we get try to read through this little subsection?
Yeah, man. Hold on, I lost my.
It is a little bit of a longer one. Oh, actually, it goes all the way to the start of
Yeah,
section D.
this one's subdivided. So this is
Yeah.
section 1, subsection C, subsection 3, and then it is then subdivided into what does it go to E?
Letters, yeah. A through F.
A through F. Yeah, man. if I could
It's got to be an easier way.
if I could raise one qualm with smart people who write worthy books, it would be, I don't know, just think of dumb American workers when you're writing your books and you're planning and mapping and formatting. Because, like, I feel like if you're like a fancy person and you have all the time in the world, it doesn't matter how this book is subdivided. But when you're like a real normal person who doesn't have this like huge surplus of time, it's difficult just explaining to someone like, yeah, we're in chapter 3. What the fuck is chapter 3 in this book? Like, think about us, man. Think about us, Levinas. If I could go back in time, that's what I would do. I would be a copy editor for Continental Philosophers, and my focus would be formatting and typesetting and all that, with the mind toward 21st century American workers. Anyway.
Yeah. Formatting for the American dirtbag.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, we're like a bunch of fucking...
That could be your little subtitle.
That would be a good
Be a good essay too.
Yeah, it'd be a good essay in like the writing workshop that we got going on, like, because thinking about formatting and thinking about presentation, it does matter and it is important, but it's also probably boring for people, so I will stop talking about it. But yeah, it's nuts. Yeah,
I
we
think
can
it'll make people feel less alienated, though.
Oh,
like if
yeah.
you're listening to this, you're reading it, you're gonna be like, okay, cool. These guys who are fucking obsessing over this book are still like, what the fuck, Levinas?
Dude, I'll bet there's
Like-
people out there who they're like, what do you mean? It makes perfect sense to me because I'm so
Yeah.
smart. And like, no, that's logically it follows. Well, guess what, bitch? Fuck you, dude. Like, I don't know. Anyway.
The pragmatist in me is just like, make it simple. I would get yelled at when I was in college. Like, people would say I wrote too folksy, my philosophy professors. And I'm like, I just try to make it one, interesting, and then two, simple so people can understand what I'm saying. But it's like the philosophy like community has just evolved into like a bunch of people who are just sitting there and masturbating with each other instead of
It's a circle jerk.
praxis.
It's
Yeah,
a circle jerk.
but-
They're all sitting around huffing little bags that they farted into, and they're passing it to one another, and they're like, "Oh, that was a good one."
smells like
To be
roses.
fair, I mean, we're like focusing on a lot of 20th century French writers.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
I mean, part of their shtick is like,
We're weird and artsy.
well, to play with the ambiguity of the French language,
Yeah.
right? Because it's so there's so many letters that you don't pronounce. So speech actually does play a difference between writing and
Or is it a difference?
exactly.
Yeah.
Ontology.
Last thing I was just gonna say, there's a thing about Foucault where, like, I don't know if you guys heard of it or not, but somebody was like interviewing him and they were like, man, you're like really easy to understand when we're talking right now. He's like, but your books, and Foucault was like, I have to make like 20% of what I write incomprehensible for French people to take me serious.
Yeah.
So it's like a marketing strategy too. So capital comes in again.
Dude, that's huge. Do you ever see the Chomsky Foucault debate?
Not in a long time.
Yeah. That's a good one to watch, because like I like Chomsky, but I like Foucault maybe more than I like Chomsky. But Chomsky's
Same.
like telling Foucault, like, you're full of shit, dude. You never say anything, and I don't necessarily disagree. Like, okay. We'll get into this section and we'll go some more. Section 3, subsection 3, whatever. Truth presupposes justice. The spontaneous freedom of the I, unconcerned with its justification, is an eventuality inscribed in the essence of the separated being, a being no longer participating, and hence drawing from itself its own existence, coming forth from a dimension of interiority, a being conformable to the fate of Gigas, who sees those who look at him without seeing him, and who knows that he is not seen. But does not Gigas' position involve the impunity of a being alone in the world? That is, a being for whom the world is a spectacle. And is not this the very condition for solitary and hence uncontested and unpunished freedom and for certitude? Yeah, dude, that uncontested, unjustified. Is not this silent world, that is, this pure spectacle, accessible to true knowledge? Who can punish the exercise of the freedom of knowing? Or more exactly, how can the spontaneity of the freedom that is manifested in certitude be called in question? Is not truth correlative with the freedom that is this side of justice, since it is the freedom of a being that is alone? So, I feel like this is maybe a little bit of elucidation on your question, Cesar, where he's like, why? This is why, like, do the meme. We live in a society, but like he's saying, we live in a society, and that's what makes life possible and awesome and worth living. Like, if you like Robinson Crusoe, nobody wants to be Robinson Crusoe. Go try it. Go live in a bush. It would suck ass. And like, in order to be a worthy participant in that world, in that society, like, this is what it takes. This is a social contract. I don't know. Could we say he's doing a social contract? I don't know. I think so. But I also think that, like, I'm presupposing a lot. Like, I already agree with him, so I don't need to be convinced.
Section A, the anarchy of the spectacle, the evil genius. But a world absolutely silent that would not come to us from the word, be it mendacious, would be anarchaic, without principle, without a beginning. Thought would strike nothing substantial. On first contact, the phenomenon would degrade into appearance, and in this sense would remain an equivocation under suspicion of an evil genius. The evil genius does not manifest himself to the state, his lie. He remains as possible behind things which all seem to manifest themselves for good. The possibility of their fall to the state of images or veils co-determines their apparition as pure spectacle, and betrays the recess that harbors the evil genius. Whence the possibility of universal doubt, which is not a personal adventure that happened to Descartes. This possibility is constitutive of apparition as such, whether produced in a sensible experience or in mathematical evidence. Husserl, who nonetheless admitted the possibility of an auto-presentation of things, found this equivocation again in the essential incompletion of that auto-presentation, and in the always possible breakup of the synthesis that sums up the sequence of its aspects. The equivocation here is not due to the confusion of two notions, two substances, or two properties. It is not to be counted among the confusions produced within a world that has already appeared. Nor is it the confusion of being and nothingness. What appears is not degraded into a nothing, but the appearance which is not a nothing is not a being either, not even an interior being, for it is nowise in itself. It proceeds as though from a mocking intention. He to whom the real had just presented itself with an appearance that shone forth as the very skin of being, is being made game of. Sorry, words are hard. For already the primordial or the ultimate abandons the very skin in which it shone in its nudity, as a covering that announces, dissimulates, imitates, or deforms it. The doubt that arises from this ever renewed equivocation that constitutes the very apparition of the phenomenon does not implicate the acuity of the gaze that might erroneously confuse quite distinct beings in a world fully univocal. Nor does the doubt question the consistency of forms of this world, which in fact may be borne by an unremitting becoming. It concerns the sincerity of what appears. It is thought in the silent and indecisive apparition a lie were perpetrated, as though the danger of error arose from an imposture, as though the silence were but the modality of an utterance. The silent world is a world that comes to us from the other, be he an evil genius. Its equivocation is insinuated into a mockery. Thus, silence is not a simple absence of speech. Speech lies in the depths of language, like a laughter perfidiously, how do you say that? Perfidiously held back. It is the inverse of language. The interlocutor has given a sign, but has declined every interpretation. This is the silence that terrifies. Speech consists in the other coming to the assistance of the sign, given forth attending his own manifestation in signs, redressing the equivocal by this attendance.
The evil genius's lie is not an utterance opposed to the veridical word. It is in that interspace between the illusory and the serious in which a subject who doubts breathes. The evil genius's lie is beyond every lie. In the ordinary lie, the speaker dissimulates himself, to be sure, but in the dissimulating word does not evade speech, and hence can be refuted. The inverse of language is like a laughter that seeks to destroy language. A laughter infinitely reverberated where mystification interlocks in mystification, without ever resting on a real speech, without ever commencing. The spectacle of the silent world of facts is bewitched. Every phenomenon masks, mystifies ad infinitum, making actuality impossible. It is the situation created by those derisive beings communicating across a labyrinth of innuendos which Shakespeare and Goethe have appear in their scenes of sorcerers where speech is anti-language and where to respond would be to cover oneself with ridicule. Section B. Expression is the principle. The ambivalence of apparition is surmounted by expression, the presentation of the other to me, the primordial event of signification. To comprehend a signification is not to go from one term of relationship to another, at perceiving relations within the given. To receive the given is already to receive it as taught, as an expression of the other. Not that it would be necessary to mythically presuppose a God who signals himself by his world. The world becomes our theme, and hence our object, as proposed to us. It comes from a primordial teaching, in which scientific work itself is established and which it requires. The world is offered in the language of the other. It is born by propositions. The other is the principle of phenomena. The phenomenon is not deduced from him. One does not rediscover him by tracing back from the sign the thing would be to the interlocutor, giving this sign, in a movement analogous to that leading from the appearance to things in themselves. For deduction is a mode of thinking that applies to objects already given. The interlocutor cannot be deduced, for the relationship between him and me is presupposed by every proof. It is presupposed by every symbolism, and not only because it is necessary to agree on that symbolism, establish its conventions, which, according to Plato in the Cratylus, cannot be laid down arbitrarily. This relationship is already necessary for a given to appear as a sign signaling a speaker, whatever be signified by the sign, and though it be forever undecipherable. And it is necessary that the given function as a sign for it to be even given. He who signals himself by a sign, qua signifying that sign, is not the signified of the sign, but delivers the sign and gives it. The given refers to the giver, but this reference is not causality, as it is not the relation of a sign to its signification. We shall speak of it at greater length presently.
I have a lot of questions, but I don't know. I think I need to write more about them because I feel like the questions I have can't even be properly formulated. They can't be productively formulated because I like this the signifier. It's not that I am the referent, or it's not that I am the signified, but it's that my interpretation, my own like hermeneutic world is the signified. And so like when I'm talking to you, when I say tree to you, that tree, I happen to have a branch here in my office that's just a branch, and there's currently hats on it. Sometimes it has sunglasses on it. It also has little homemade bracelets. So when I say branch, right? This branch isn't the signified. It's my perception and my interpretation and my relation to this branch is what is actually being signified. So it's not that this thing is what I'm referring to, and it's not that I am referring back to me. It's that I am trying to point you to this construct that only exists for me, which is why it's still proper that to say like all these things exist for me. Phenomenologically, the world only exists for me and for each one of us. Which is why the idea of objectivity is a red herring. I like that a lot. I like it a lot. So I feel like I'm like, yeah, okay, I get that. But also there's a lot going on in this section that I don't know. I'm not, like, I feel like I couldn't productively ask a whole lot of questions about it. Other than just being like, wow, that's so cool. I love what he's doing, because it is so cool and I do love what he's doing. One thing though is up here on silence. Where does he say? Is that page 90? Yeah.
I think, yeah, around there.
But a world absolutely silent that would not come to us from the word, be it mendacious, would be anarchic, without principle, without a beginning. Thought would strike nothing substantial. And then later on, when does he say silence comes to us from the other? Aha. The silent world is a world that comes to us from the other, be he an evil genius. Its equivocation is insinuated in a mockery. Thus, silence is not a simple absence of speech. Speech lies in the depths of silence, like laughter perfidiously held back. Perfidiously is like I think with like ill intent or like deceptive, I think.
It sounds bad.
Yeah. It is the inverse of language. The interlocutor has given a sign, but has declined every interpretation. This is the silence that terrifies. So going back to that, the Ilia, the there is, the silent world. It is the inverse of language. So like this, like language is us trying to cope with the Ilia. Like language is us trying to cope with the fact that we're embodied subjects and we share a world and blah 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 and this and that.
Could you quickly define what this Ilia is? I'm not
The
familiar.
Ilia, there is. It means there is. And it's
It's French,
yeah,
right?
Ilia,
Like
yeah,
Ilia.
Ilia,
Okay.
yeah. Don't make fun of my accent, dude. When we were in France and Belgium, I was fucking speaking French like a motherfucker, but like I'm a dumbass American, so like some people were gracious and they were like working with me, but I was fucking that language up, dude. I was just like ha 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 bonjour motherfucker. But that was actually really cool. And going back to not sharing a language with someone, how that's an immediate barrier to recognition, or whatever. I noticed in France and in Belgium, I was so much more comfortable than I was in Germany and in Poland because I know French. So I knew, like, I was like, oh, I'm comfortable here. I can talk to people. I can walk down the road and I can still contextualize myself. But in Germany and Poland and Slovenia, I was just like, I'm a stranger. I'm a stranger in a strange land.
And Scotland.
Can't understand what those motherfuckers are saying, dude.
I've been to Ireland and it's like, dude, I feel more foreign here than I do in like a country, where they don't even speak English.
um But okay, so the Ilia is it's like it's the outside. It's the whirlwind, right? It's like this non-conceptual world that it is. Like there is. Like it just is. And so I think I'm injecting that here, but like I do think that's what's kind of going on is like we are these languages house of being, right? Like I feel like that's him kind of saying that in a different way. But it's also weird because like, is he saying there's like a qualitative difference between like if you and I are sitting together and we're silent, that would be different if you were like soliciting something from me and I was refusing to give it to you. Like if we're having a conversation and then all of a sudden I just put up a wall and stop giving, like that's different than the kind of silence that we can have together. Like if you're sitting behind Circle K with someone and you guys are both content to just kind of sit there and like you're just happy and you're like, yeah, we're just sitting we don't have to fill these empty spaces because we're content to be. But if you are kind of soliciting something from me and I'm refusing to give it to you, like that's scary. That's bad. I don't know. I don't know what I was going
Christopher,
with.
do you have Circle Ks in your
Yeah.
area?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
We got a bunch of them.
Do you have Quick Trip?
I don't think so.
Dude, you gotta. So we have them all over Phoenix, the best gas station in the world. They're also in Kansas City for no fucking reason.
That's weird.
Like, I don't know why, dude.
Quick Trip.
Quick Trip. I think it doesn't have a C. I think it's just QUIK.
No, I don't think so. I know we have Circle K because I like went out drinking one night with my buddies when I was in the Navy, and I woke up the next day and there was a charge at Circle K, and it was like I do not remember that. I was like paranoid. I lost my credit card. then I guess I got a car wash that day and I didn't remember. And I was obsessing over it though. Like, you know, that
God
like
damn.
anxiety when you wake up. I was like, oh God.
Yeah, dude. Oh, dude, where's my
I was gonna
car?
say I was gonna say with the silence thing too, I was thinking of like Pascal too, that like existential silence where it was like I'm gonna mess up the quote, but it was like the infinite spaces and the silence, like God's silence is like horrifying. So I was thinking of like eerie silence versus like what you were talking about, where it's like solicitude, just being content like together
Mm-hmm.
in silence is different than like that like existential horror and eeriness of like, fuck, are we alone here? Does my life have meaning? Is nothing like all there is? And it's like the other can kind of bridge that gap.
Yeah.
No way.
Mandy says K-holes. Yeah. The K-hole is the modern interpretation of Levinas's Ilya. Or I'd even say just like a bad acid trip, or I've had bad mushroom trips too. I think any kind of bad trip can be horrifying in that way. Yeah. What?
I was gonna say, Christopher, what you kind of sparked in my mind of like maybe what I'm starting to understand with this section about silence. There is a qualitative difference of you're by yourself and you're silent versus you're sitting in the car and there's another person sitting next to you and you're both silent. That has a different feeling to it. And maybe that's what Levinas is pointing to is like, I mean, we call it awkward silence, but you don't have awkward silences by yourself, right? You have awkward silence because there's
you're with the other.
Exactly. And so that's when and can become awkward. I mean, in his case, it's almost saying he's almost kind of making it seem like it's evil or something like
Yeah.
it's the ambiguity of potential evil, perhaps.
Yeah.
Which is then Nance, what you started bringing up about then maybe how like semiotic starts to play a role in what is signified, what is the signifier signified, and the referent of all these things, and what silence can maybe be as a signifier.
Yeah.
With the other, which is, I don't know, I guess I haven't heard anyone talk about silence as a potential signification that you could be giving off.
It's
like getting the sorry.
It becomes a conspicuous negativity or a positivity in itself. Like it becomes this, it's not just an empty space waiting to be filled. Like it is a space that is full of my silence. Yeah, I love it, dude. It, like anytime it comes down to like nerding out over language, I get excited. That's what really gets my motor going. I love language. And I don't know.
I was just gonna say lastly, like the silent treatment, where it's like your partner is mad at you and they like tell you, like they'll be like, I'm giving you the silent treatment, like if you don't react to it. Like kind of, and that in itself can like feel evil, or like you ever like tell a joke you think is funny,
doesn't land.
Yeah, and then you also don't know if you offended the person and then they're quiet, or like the type of silence where it's like I was like 18 and like texting a girl like my unrequited feelings, and it's like no response, and it's like
making mixtapes.
That phone not ringing is silent is fucking horrifying at that experience. But those are just other like interpersonal examples I was thinking of.
No, that's that. The like there is a difference between just being like reserved, being reticent, like being like, I'm content, I don't need to fill this space. Like that's, I think we should all seek that out more often. But then there's also this like menacing silence that, yeah, like when you tell a joke and you don't get the response. That happens to me all the time. Or even, I don't know, saying hello and greeting to someone and they kind of don't respond. And then there's also like this extra level of like professing your affection for someone and they don't like, they don't even deign to say like, hey, I just want to be friends. There's just like radio silence. Like that can be even more horrifying.
And the signifier, like,
Yeah.
I'm telling you without saying anything, like, ew.
Yeah, but
Like,
then,
no,
but then
thank
it
you.
leaves the space open for you to be like, to wonder.
That's true.
Like I would prefer you to just tell me like, no, you
Tell me to
suck.
fuck off.
Yeah.
Same.
But like when there's silence, that empty space, that becomes this creeping, shambling, monstrous thing where you can kind of create anything, and it can be horrifying.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, this especially feels interesting to think about through a CMT lens. Yeah, because how long do you wait to receive a text back from someone before you start to interpret it as silence? So even this idea of how we signify to each other in more telecommunicative ways these days than even Levinas had access to. Um, that's also something to kind of like reflect on with how relating to others plays a part. Yeah, but you know, I feel like that's like combining like a whole other kind of conversation of Levinas and CMT.
I don't think that's as far a leap as it might seem. I don't think CMT is too far removed from Levinas, especially that like, I mean, Mikey's piece, McLuhan and Levinas on the phone. I know Ayo and Wukash both were kind of talking about our relation to digital media, digital communication. And I think they got pretty Levinasian, if not explicitly, then I do think it was there. But yeah, like we are all kind of dislocated, translocated, kind of free floating. When we relate, or like when it comes to how we relate to communication, because we carry around this machine that in theory should put us available at all times. We should always be like ready to hand, always. And when that breaks down, it can kind of cause us to doubt or to have this type of anxiety or whatever. So dude, I think it's super pertinent to how we relate to others. Like I used to freak the fuck out if I didn't get a response within minutes. I would freak the fuck out. Like, and I don't know. I may or may not. Doesn't matter why. But like I would get angry, and I was genuinely concerned, and I was genuinely concerned. Like I was like, you need to respond. You need to let me know something horrible hasn't happened to you, because my mind always immediately jumped to something horrible happened to you. But that was always a me problem. Like, and I mean, I would get fucking angry, like toxic angry, like abusive, bad male, bad guy energy. Like, and it took a lot of self-reflection, and it took me being able to like get that distance from myself to to be like, no, it is a me problem. Like this person, it doesn't matter what's the reason, they can't respond. And if they could, then they would. So, and they're not, so that means they can't right now. And like that was a huge learning process for me to rein in my little kid throwing a fit energy. Like, because at the end of the day, that's what it was. I was just throwing a fit. Like, respond. And that kind of self-centeredness presented itself as anxiety. And like, I was concerned for the person, and I genuinely was concerned, but also, no, that's just me being a self-centered asshole. I want everyone to be ready to hand for me right now. I want everyone on call for me right now. And I mean, yeah, dude, kids have to learn all this shit. Like, the world is such a different fucking place than it was 15 years ago. Even though nothing has changed. Nothing materially has changed. Well, things have materially gotten worse, I think, for almost everybody. So that's the material change. But like normatively and behavior-wise, human behavior-wise, we have fucking changed so much. Even in, I'd say, 5 or 6 years, normative behavior has changed so much. And like from my perspective, parenting, I kind of get to see it, and I have the privilege to be able to kind of take time and have conversations and say like, well, you know, it's kind of fucked up that you do that. Maybe you should not do that. But I also have the privilege from this perspective of the alien anthropologist of like seeing trends and shit like that. So I do count myself lucky, but it is fucking scary. The world terrifies me. I would not make it. If I were a kid, if you took me from 1995 and dropped me today in 2025, 2024, that motherfucker would not make it. And I feel horrible for all kids nowadays. But we're going way.
Devices. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's devices, but it's also material conditions, man. Like,
yeah.
Parenting is a huge commitment. Parenting takes time, takes energy, takes time, energy. It takes awareness. It takes education. Like, it takes so many resources that people just don't have. And so it's easy to say it's devices. And devices is a huge part of it, but devices are a symptom. Devices are not a cause. And the way we treat and rely on devices is a symptom. It's not the root cause. The root cause is structural stultification. Read time, energy.
No, I was gonna say devices now like will literally like yell at you if you don't like respond to certain things. That's all I was gonna say.
Oh,
but
dude,
I agree with
yeah.
you too.
The notifications.
I'll like laugh react something, and then I'll get like little notifications on Instagram like, this person, you haven't sent a message back in 3 hours. And it's just like, there's nothing to say to that. Like, it was a meme or something. Like,
that's crazy.
or it'll like send me somebody's story that I didn't watch and keep notifying me. And it's just like, I don't want to consume that right now. I don't even fucking like. So it's like you're fighting that and then everything else you're saying. It's all conglomerated together. But I totally agree with you that it's also that people are so exhausted that they don't have the time. Like, if you're worrying about how to pay your rent, you don't have time to talk to your kid about like cyber awareness or like, and you don't understand the same problems. Like, I didn't have a cell phone until I was 18. I was thinking about that the other day with like TikTok stuff and following and all that. And I was like, if I had a kid and they were like asking me, I'd be like, I barely made it through high school. It's like, I don't know what to tell you.
Shit's fucking defo crazy, dude. But if I can correct and we can get back on track here.
Yeah.
Unless there's anything else to add. Okay. Section C, subsection C. The cogito and the other. The cogito does not provide a commencement to this iteration of dreaming. In the Cartesian cogito, taken as the first certitude, but which for Descartes already rests on the existence of God, There is an arbitrary halt which is not justified of itself. Doubt with regard to objects implies the evidence of the exercise of doubt itself. To deny this exercise would be again to affirm this exercise. In the cogito, the thinking subject which denies its evidences ends up at the evidence of this work of negation, although in fact at a different level from that at which it had denied. But it ends up at the affirmation of an evidence that is not a final or initial affirmation, for it can be cast into doubt in its turn. The truth of the second negation, then, is affirmed at a still deeper level, but once again, one not impervious to negation. This is not purely and simply a Sisyphean labor, since the distance traversed each time is not the same. It is a movement of descent toward an ever more profound abyss, which we elsewhere have called there is, Ilia, beyond affirmation and negation. It is by reason of this operation of vertiginous descent unto the abyss, by reason of this change of level, that the Cartesian cogito is not a reasoning in the ordinary sense of the term, nor an intuition. Descartes enters into a work of infinite negation, which is indeed the work of the atheist subject that is broken with participation, and that remains incapable of an affirmation, although by the sensibility disposed for agreeableness, enters into movement unto the abyss, vertiginously sweeping along the subject incapable of stopping itself. The I in the negativity manifested by doubt breaks with participation, but does not find the cogito itself a stopping place. It is not I, it is the other that can say yes. From him comes affirmation. He is at the commencement of experience. Descartes seeks a certitude and stops at the first change of level in this vertiginous descent. In fact, he possesses the idea of infinity and can gauge in advance the return of affirmation behind the negation. But to possess the idea of infinity is to have already welcomed the other.
D. Objectivity and language. Thus, the silent world would be anarchaic. Knowing could not commence in it, but already as anarchaic at the limit of nonsense. Its presence to consciousness lies in its expectation for a word that does not come. Thus, it appears within a relation with the other as the sign the other delivers, even if he dissimulates his face, that is, declines the assistance he would have to bring to the signs he delivers, and which he delivers, consequently, in equivocation. A world absolutely silent, indifferent to the word never uttered, silent in a silence that does not permit the dividing behind the appearances of anyone that signals the world and signals himself by signaling this world, be it to lie through the appearance as an evil genius. A world so silent could not even present itself as a spectacle. In fact, a spectacle is contemplated only in the measure that it has a meaning. The meaningful is not posterior to the seen, to the sensible of themselves meaningless, which our thought would work over or modify in a certain way in accordance with a priori categories. Once the indissoluble bond that connects apparition with signification was understood, an effort was made to render the apparition posterior to signification by situating it with the finality of our practical behavior. What only appears pure objectivity, then nothing but objective, would be only a residue of this practical finality from which it would derive its meaning. Whence the priority of care over contemplation, then rootedness of cognition and a comprehension that opens up the worldhood of the world and opens the horizon of the apparition of object. More Heidegger.
Yep.
The objectivity of the object is thereby being underestimated. The ancient thesis that puts representation at the basis of every practical behavior, taxed with intellectualism, is too hastily discredited. The most penetrating gaze cannot discover in the thing its function as an implement. Does a simple suspension of action suffice to apperceive the tool as a thing? Moreover, is practical significance the primordial domain of meaning? Does it not presuppose the presence of a thought, to which it appears and before which it acquires this meaning? Does it suffice, by its own operation, to make this thought arise? Qua practical, signification refers ultimately to the being that exists in view of this very existence. It is thus derived from a term that is of itself an end. Thus, he who comprehends the signification is indispensable for the series, in which the things acquire a meaning, as the end of the series. The reference that signification implies would terminate where the reference is made from self to self, in enjoyment. The process from which beings would derive their meaning would not only in fact be finite, but as a finality, it would by essence consist in proceeding to a term and coming to an end. But the outcome is the point at which every signification is precisely lost. Enjoyment, the satisfaction and egoism of the I, is an outcome in function of which beings take on or lose their signification as means according as they are situated on the way that leads to it or away from it. But the means themselves lose their signification in the outcome. The end is unconscious as soon as it is reached. By what right could the innocence of unconscious satisfaction be said to illuminate things with signification, while it itself is assuagement?
In fact, signification has always been envisaged on the level of relations. A relation did not appear to be an intelligible content, which could be fixed intuitively. It was signifying by virtue of the system of relations into which it itself entered. Thus, throughout the whole of Western philosophy, since the late philosophy of Plato, the comprehension of the intelligible appears as a movement and never as an intuition. It is Husserl who transforms relations into correlatives of a gaze that fixes them and takes them as contents. He brings forward the idea of a signification and an intelligibility intrinsic to the content as such, of the luminosity of a content, in clarity yet more than in distinction, which is relativity, since it detaches the object from something other than itself. But it is not certain that this auto-presentation in the light could have meaning of itself. Auto-presentation, going back to that kathauto word that we discussed over the weekend. And idealism, the singabung by the subject, concludes all this realism of meaning. In fact, signification is maintained only in the breach of the ultimate unity of the satisfied being. Things begin to take on signification in the care of the being that is still on the way. Thus, consciousness itself has been derived from this breach. The intelligible would result from the non-satisfaction, the provisional indigence of this being, its remaining short of its accomplishment. But by what miracle is this possible if the outcome is the completed being, if the act is more than the potency? Must we not rather think that the calling in question of satisfaction, which is a becoming aware of it, does not come from its failing, but from an event for which the process of finality cannot serve as the prototype? The consciousness that spoils happiness goes beyond happiness and does not lead us back over the paths that led to it. The consciousness that spoils happiness and gives signification to happiness and to finality and to the finalist concatenation of implements and their users does not come out of finality. Objectivity, where being is proposed to consciousness, is not a residue of finality. The objects are not objects when they offer themselves to the hand that uses them, to the mouth and the nose, the eyes and the ears that enjoy them. Objectivity is not what remains of an implement or a food when separated from the world in which their being comes into play. It is posited in a discourse, in a conversation which proposes the world. This proposition is held between 2 points which do not constitute a system, a cosmos, a totality.
The objectivity of the object and its signification comes from language. This way, the object is posited as a theme offered envelopes the instance of signifying, not the referring of the thinker who fixes it to what is signified, and is sure part of the same system, but the manifesting of the signifier, the issuer of the sign, an absolute alterity which nonetheless speaks to him, and thereby thematizes, that is, proposes a world. The world precisely, qua propose, qua expression, has a meaning, but for this very reason is never an original. For a signification to be given Leibhaft to exhaust its being in an exhaustive apparition is an absurdity. But the non-originality of what has a meaning is not a lesser being. A reference to a reality it imitates, reverberates, or symbolizes the meaningful refers to a signifier. The sign does not signify the signifier as it signifies the signified. The signified is never a complete presence, always a sign in its turn. It does not come in a straightforward frankness. The signifier, he who emits the sign, faces, despite the inner position of the sign, without proposing himself as a theme. He can, to be sure, speak of himself, but then he would announce himself as signified, and consequently as a sign in his turn. The other, the signifier, manifests himself in speech. By speaking of the world and not of himself, he manifests himself by proposing the world, by thematizing it. Thematization manifests the other, because the proposition that posits and offers the world does not float in the air, but promises a response to him who receives this proposition, who directs himself toward the other, because in his proposition he receives the possibility of questioning. Questioning is not explained by astonishment only, but by the presence of him to whom it is addressed. A proposition is maintained in the outstretched field of questions and answers. A proposition is a sign which is already interpreted, which provides its own key. The presence of the interpretive key in the sign to be interpreted is precisely the presence of the other in the proposition, the presence of him who can come to the assistance of his disclosure. The teaching quality of all speech. Oral discourse is the plenitude of discourse. Signification or intelligibility does not arise from the identity of the same who remains in himself, but from the face-to-face other who calls upon the same. Signification does not arise because the same has needs, because he lacks something, and hence all that is susceptible or filling this lack takes on meaning. Signification is in the absolute surplus of the other with respect to the same who desires him, who desires what he does not lack, who welcomes the other across themes which the other proposes to him, or receives from him, without absenting himself from the signs thus given. Signification arises from the other stating or understanding the world, which precisely is thematized in his language or in his understanding. Signification starts with the speech, in which the world is at the same time thematized and interpreted, in which the signifier never separates himself from the sign he delivers, but takes it up again always while he exposes. For this assistance always given to the word, which posits the things, is the unique essence of language.
I'm feeling a little brain dead. I'm not sure about you guys.
I don't know. I manifested the world, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
So out of those three paragraphs, other than like just a general impression of like we are participating in the world, and like the world, like the outside world, this objective world is this constructed thing that like exists but is also like filled out by us. That's a horrible way to say what I'm trying to say, but yeah, I don't know. Can you recap some of that, Christopher?
For me, it's still, I'm with Cesar a little bit in the
Yeah.
brainedness, but I think for me, it's just circling back to the whole tree argument, kind of, that signification isn't like the word tree only shows you like an idea of the tree. We can't have the same tree. I don't think he's positing like a platonic form of treeness, but it's always less, but also more in the sense that it's like you attribute your own ideas of it. Like when I say tree, I may be thinking of like an oak tree. You could be thinking of a sycamore or something like that, or where you're from, like somebody in the tropics may consider something else, or if somebody's in the desert, they're not going to have the same idea of it. So for me, it's just him playing with language and just trying to say that it tries its best, so to speak, but it's not
Not-
exactly.
It's not primordial, right? The signifier, even like his play with the signified or the referent. I love it because it really is the case. And also totally tangential, probably muddy the waters, but this is where I think there's the most kind of crosstalk between Lumen and Levinas. It's this kind of like constructive, because I think constructivism is the proper articulation of our relationship to the world. Like we participate in the world, like we co-create it. Like it's we're alongside it, we're in it. It serves as our conditions of possibility, but we fill it out. So it like the world is a blank exoskeleton, and we fill in the world as we are living in it and perceiving it and interpreting it and all that. But yeah, so the signifier, the signified marker, Sharpie, like Sharpie, like I'm not pointing to this platonic Sharpie. There is no platonic Sharpie. There is my perception of the Sharpie, my interpretation of the Sharpie, and the unique mental construct of the Sharpie that only lives in my head. And you can also have a Sharpie construct, and everyone else has a Sharpie construct. But there is no platonic Sharpie. And when we use language, the proper way to use it is to always remember that I'm talking to a human. And this human is telling me something. It's not the case that we are two stochastic parrots. It's not the case that we are just regurgitating. In fact, we are never regurgitating. We are never simply recounting or accounting. It's always a relation of living content from one to another. And I think that's fucking amazing. Like I love it. Language is the house of being, right? Language, without language, we are apes. We are just apes. But it's also like it's become so problematic. Like words, what do words mean? Like, I don't know, man. Taking up this participatory position. Who was the first to bring up, was it Terrence? Who really kind of painted the participation in bright red paint the other day when he was telling us about participation. Like,
I think so. I think it was Terrence.
But that is it. Like we are always in this participatory relationship, and you can either like disavow that participation and pretend like, wait, them's the grapes, or them's the grapes, or them's the breaks. I mean, them's the breaks. It is what it is. It's not personal. It's business. Yeah, it's not personal. It's business. And just pretend that like we live in this objective world and blah, blah, blah. Or we can all kind of take up the responsibility, the radical responsibility of being participatory subjects in the fucking world. And that to me anyway, that's the call. That's the call of conscience. That's the other calling me into question. I am aware of my responsibility in co-creating the world that I live in. Now, granted, it would be easy to do the bleeding heart thing. For a very long time in my life, I maintained my pessimism and my nihilism and my bleak outlook by pointing to children in Africa and farmers in South America and say, well, how do we ever expect to have a just world when the CIA can go in and kill hundreds of thousands of Guatemalans because they want cheaper fucking bananas? And these are real problems that exist. And how can I wake up and face the world when the computers that I'm using to research and study and have dialogues and enrich my life and extend my social circle and all that, like, that's built on the labor of African fucking enslaved children? Like, the world sucks. The world is a negative place. The world's a horrible place. Wouldn't it be cool if we could all do something about it? The thing is, we can all do something about it. And it's not like I'm going to focus on Africa to justify my own selfish negativity and my own fucking cowardice. It's that I'm going to take up the responsibility to try to be a better parent, to try to be a better father, to try to be a better partner, to try to be a better friend, brother, son, cousin, neighbor, co-worker, person on the internet, fellow traveler, like whatever it is. Like, there's always this call to be better because like we all share this responsibility, and not everybody has gone through this process of awakening. Like, not everyone has encountered this infinity. So trying to play the blame game and pointing the finger and saying, well, it's all the liberals' fault. It's all the Republicans' fault. It's all Trump's fault. It's all Kamala's fault. It's all like, no, that's bullshit. That's just disavow, dude. Stop being a bitch. Grab your fucking balls. Take responsibility. And if there's something you can't do, I can't stop. Lithium mines. So I'm not going to focus on lithium mines. I'm going to focus on what can I do? And for the time being, I've become convinced that it's doing this type of theory, that it's coming together with like-minded fellow travelers and trying to theorize the situation so that we can have a better starting point, so that maybe my children and the coming generation will have a better chance at doing something, because the ideologies that I spent so much time believing in, anarchism and communism, got us nowhere. So it's like, it's that call, the other is kind of calling me out. And like it's recognized in this participatory relationship. We are participating in the world. And the focus on language, I think is primary. I think a lot can and must be done when it comes to kind of how we use language and how it's using us, because it's been so instrumentalized by modernity and by capital. But
that's the focus of today too. I was just gonna say language. Like, that's the big, like, without getting into like gender stuff, just pronouns and everything else. It's like human beings intuitively know that language is the house of being in the sense that it structures our world where and as you were talking to like this last little sentence for this assistance always given to the word which posits the thing in the unique sense of language reminds me of that like Heideggerian reference oriental totality. It's like world in the sense of like the world of carpenters, the world of
Yeah.
plumbers, traffic lights, to use Dave's example. It's that referential totality exists before you. You come into the game, and language is your way of like learning how to express yourself, learning how to take ownership, also trying to redefine the world, or it's the best way we can explain. That's why you have like all these postmodern novels and other stuff that are trying to like break the norms and whatnot as a way to like show their individuality and other stuff. Like language, you still can't escape from it. Like if you're Cormac McCarthy and you're not using quotation marks, you still are reacting in a way. Like the punk's reacting. It's like you're still caught up in the game, and that's okay.
No,
But it's
it's
just realizing that.
realizing it and realizing that you're either like you're either doing the thing overtly and explicitly or you're doing the thing in reference to like you said it, you can't escape it. And like not only is that okay, but like that's what provides the conditions for you to do anything at all in the first place. And having that awareness. It is weird how language games really do seem to have taken on all the like political drive. Like I argue with my kids, like there's specific words that, you know, some people are and are not allowed to say. And yeah, sure, that's cool. Like, but they like, it's just so weird. It's like, no, if there's a word I want to say, I'm going to say it. Now, do I want to be the type of person who has a desire to say a specific word to get a specific response or reaction out of someone? Do I want to offend someone? Do I want to hurt someone's feeling? Do I want to throw a fit? No, but also I'm like, I can't believe that there's words that people are just like, yeah, you can't say that. It's like, I don't get it, dude. I don't understand it. And it's crazy. Like people do focus on these language games in such a fucking weird way. Because rather than changing the world, they're trying to re-quilt it. They're trying to recontextualize it.
They're not in cages, they're in enclosures, so it's okay. Or
Ooh.
if I just have existential angst and change my name or how I want to like emancipate myself, that's how I do it. But then you're still left with like, oh wait, maybe that wasn't it. I still have that like gap. So it's like,
That's like the culmination of this kind of modern individualism. I will change the world not by actually changing it, but by requilting, reinterpreting, recontextualizing.
And I have to change your world at the same time, or it's not effective.
Ooh.
It's like you said, it just grasps the discourse in a way that I feel like it hasn't. I'm sure it hasn't like other times, but there's times where I respect it, like Malcolm X calling himself Malcolm X
For sure.
to address what happened with his name historically and the fact that he didn't have an identity. Yeah, that fucking matters. But when you have like a fucking 13-year-old kid who like doesn't have any friends and he's like, I'm just gonna change my name to something crazy, and then he's wondering why he's not fitting in and getting picked on. It's like, bro, you're not Malcolm X. I get what you're trying to do, but it's like buy a leather jacket or like something else. Like it's just taking hold. What do you think, Cesar?
Well, Levinas mentions the term egoism quite a bit, and I'm not really sure what he's referring to in like his references of what he's thinking egoism is. But this book has been on my radar for a while, and I picked it up while traveling over the summer, and it's Max Stirner. I guess this translation is called the unique and its property, but oftentimes, I guess in the past, it's been translated as the ego and its own. Um, and so he's Max Stirner is kind of like I guess a quintessential person you would go to think about egoist ideas, which is something I don't even really know. But it, I mean, at some point it would be nice to go through this book to kind of see if I can remember things from Totality and Infinity and be like, oh, okay, what might actually be the two different ideas of well, I guess maybe in Stirner's case it might be more of ontology. I'm not sure if he's ever going to get into metaphysics. Um, but just kind of like seeing this like always this continuous thing to always have to live with as a human, which is the I versus um being in a social world. You know, that tension, that it's always a tension of what are the things I feel like I do for myself versus what are the things I feel like I do because I am part of a world. Um and like the balances of where do you feel like you're being pulled or where you make decisions for yourself versus yeah, where are these other decisions kind of coming from? Um I don't know. It's just a perennial thing that will never get old of arguing arguing for or thinking about that, you know.
I like Stirner a lot. I'm stoked that you have that book, man. And yeah, I think Mandy just said in the chat, "Oh no, Stirner." I think Stirner's I think Stirner's been
open mind
misappropriated.
here.
No, I think Stirner's been misappropriated. I think he's really interesting, but yeah, I think this. Like we carry around a weight. We carry with us like all the baggage of being an embodied subject, and like all that entails. And how do you deal with that? Like, do you take up this responsibility? Do you answer the call? Or do you turn away from it and be this like hyper modern liberal in like the proper political sense individual? Yeah, dude, maybe we all need to come together right now over me. Bum, bum,
Let's
bum,
hold
bum.
hands.
Yeah. Let's do that. Let's have a digital kumbaya.
Kumbaya.
Gal Gadot did that already.
Oh yeah. The imagine all the people. Did you guys watch any of the Olympics?
I saw the
My
pole vaulter.
Oh, with the
my
dick.
sister's been watching it the whole time, so I just kind of like jump in every once in a while and just be like, "Oh yeah, there's that person again, you know, the one who racks up all the golds."
Yeah, man. There's definitely something perverse in the Olympics. I mean, first of all, on the surface, there's like the nationalism, which is gross. But there's also this like perverse liberal enjoyment. Oh, that's shit. That's something that jumped out at me earlier when he's talking about enjoyment. I don't think I'm going to be able to have a productive conversation about it right now, but I want to bookmark it for later, like when we get back to it. I wonder if that could be one of these threads that we pull as far as Lacan contra Levinas. Because I think that's a very fecund conversation. I haven't read that book, that Mari Rudy book. I have it on my to read list. Mari Rudy wrote a book about Levinas and Lacan that Christopher showed me the other day. Hopefully I can read that soon. But yeah, the Lacan contra Levinas conversation, I think there's a lot of shit that can come out of that. But with the Olympics, there's like a liberal standpoint where it's like all is well with the cosmos. We are proper and we are polite and we come here to celebrate the Olympics. And they banned Russia and Belarus, but Israel is still fully participating. And the reason they banned Russia and Belarus is for war, aggressive war, whatever. But Israel is still there. And then, and I don't know, anyone on the internet, if you have a problem with me saying Israel is an aggressive state, then you're not listening to what I'm saying. Israel is being, anyway. And it's just like, it's all very like, there's so much ideology in the Olympics, and they're like, we are the liberal Olympic enjoyers and we are on the right side of history. In fact, history's over. We beat it 30 years ago. We're here. We're in the future. Everything's fine. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. And that man is, the ongoing genocide machine that supports all the liberal luxuries that we all enjoy. So the Olympics is gross. But I fucking love watching the Olympics, and I love watching humans do gnarly shit. I love watching people who are the best in the world at X activity do X activity. And I care less about the competition. I care less about medals and who won and who lost. There's like a spirit of excellence that kind of pervades that I think is awesome. And I think everybody should give watching the Olympics a chance, and maybe just do it from this disinterested standpoint of like, I'm just seeing people do awesome shit, because it's fucking amazing. And I am upset that skateboarding is considered proper enough to be in the Olympics now, because I want skateboarding to stay dangerous. I want to keep it a crime. I think, I don't know, maybe I'm a hipster, but I think kids need kind of structured wilderness, like it's outside, it's on the outside, it is in the wilderness, there, or at least on the fringes, but there's enough of like an autopoietic structure in the world of skateboarding that it can actually be a very pro-social community. And that's not to say it always is, but for the most part, I think fringe groups, fringe activities are necessary for kids that don't fit in the football team and the baseball team. If they go to skateboarding, because it still requires discipline. Like, you can't be doing drugs all the time and going to jail all the time if you want to actually get good at skateboarding. You have to commit yourself and be disciplined. And just like graffiti art, graffiti is another world that if you want to get good at graffiti, you have to be disciplined and you have to stay out of trouble. And I hope graffiti never, well, Jesus Christ, they already have, I mean, that's already like the popular aesthetic where they pay graffiti writers to come decorate their restaurant, which can be a good thing when it comes to like connecting with the community. But still, like, I don't want the neoliberal world to gobble up everything that used to be almost autonomous in a way. So I'm pissed off that skateboarding is in the Olympics now, and breakdancing. But watching the Olympics is cool as shit, man. And it just kind of dawned on me this year because I've always kind of watched it, or at least been aware of it. But I was really watching it this year from this like alien perspective, and yeah, I realized there's a lot of good things about it that I like, even though there's some bad shit with it too.
I should probably go soon, but I want to wrap up uh a thread that, well, I guess I want to start a thread of something that's already been on my mind. And you talking about the Olympics, and us talking about Levinas, I think is the perfect um way for me to kind of maybe bring both together, which is to say, notice how in the Olympics, no one is just competing in a vacuum by
Mm,
themselves.
mm.
Notice that the word compete is insinuates there has to be something against, which is all the other people who are
Dude,
maybe even slightly better than you.
dude.
But, you just the probabilities of circumstances, maybe you won out this time.
Mm.
Um, and so something I've been thinking about a lot, uh, I mean, just because I like a lot of like fitness things, even though I always kind of had a chip on my shoulder about that stuff, like, anti-jock stuff, a lot younger in life. But I felt like I learned how to embrace jock for myself, you know. Um, and maybe a part of that is like I've been having these ideas of at some point I would want to explore. Maybe it's something like phenomenology of what it means to be in something like competition or like sports, exercise, like what that does kind of to us as like a reflection back to ourselves. And one of the things I've been thinking about with Levinas as being confronted with the other is uh I've also I feel like I also make that comparison to the author Yukio Mishima.
Is that the
Are you
guy
guys
that
familiar with him?
killed himself?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Not
Um
controversial at all.
No, super.
yeah. I mean, well, specifically this book, this little essay he wrote called Sun and Steel, and it's a little bit of like a Nietzschean Bataillean
Mm,
approach to um getting buff. It's I guess you could say the thesis is getting buff for the sake of eventually getting to like an apex death death mode, which
mm-hmm.
he eventually did. Um but he talks about at some point because he started as an author and he regrets um how fragile he was as an author, and it was only he started to realize what the value was of being in a sparring mode with the other. And that actually teaches you something. That's a way to, I guess maybe to use the Levinas term, it justice starts to take place. You get to start to be justified whether you're strong or not. Um, you get to be someone else has to test you in a sense. And so, that's what happens in sports, like the Olympics. You feel this need for some reason to have to test yourself against others because they're also striving for excellence. So whether it's sparring or whether it's reading or all these other things, um, being confronted with the other might be a way then of actually pushing your purposiveness.
Mhm.
So that's an idea I've been thinking about a lot with just lifting weights. But specifically, maybe how are you challenging yourself against maybe your previous record? So you're almost going up against the other of your ghost, um, which is an interesting thing to think about. Um, but also I noticed if the times that I had to when I was first learning how to like use the gym for the first time, I felt like I needed someone to show me how to do these things. And because of their presence, I noticed I would try a lot harder. I had this like pressure of like I want to do good because there's this other person who's like putting justice upon me in a sense. And so that's just kind of been my thoughts of maybe specifically with justice and like why it's important to confront the other, what it could do to us.
I think that coming into contact with the other, justification, facing resistance from the real world, as opposed to like just continuing to live in this solipsistic fantasy world where words have no meaning, and all you have to do to make the world a better place is to change your signifier, change the way you relate to your signifier. But yeah, like the contest. I grabbed these books because Dave kind of alludes to it in both of these books, but I don't think he's ever really explicit. That's Waypoint and Time Energy. When he's talking about like learning to play the violin, like doing that in a vacuum doesn't really get you anywhere. Like you need this, you need the world to reflect yourself back at yourself so you can improve and justify and this and that. But I don't think he really gets into the justification side of it. He gets more into the like personal meaning and accomplishment and shit like that. Now, he has talked about doing jujitsu and how that has changed the way he kind of relates to himself. And it's this justification. It's this like being called to question and being put to task. And yeah, dude, I love it. I think we all need to have that kind of forceful contact. We need the force feedback from the world, but also from an other to keep us from, doing all the crazy things that we might tend to do if we do just live in our little bubbles. Which, going back to critical media theory and talking about like how human behavior has changed so much, like there's so much content on the internet where people are just like looking at another person and saying, look how fucked up this person is. And look how stupid they are. And I am justifying my existence by distinguishing myself from them and saying, I am not this foolish person. I am not this sad, ridiculous, insane person. I, in fact, see how sad, see how insane, see how ridiculous, see how pathetic this person is. And so this type of justification where it's just about like differentiation and kind of distinguishing, I think is an extremely toxic form of justification, because it's not about like, I don't know, coming into your own and accounting for yourself and like pursuing this infinity and like climbing Mount Improbable, like pursuing verticality. It's about pushing others down. So it is, yeah, I think the contest or like these types of competitions not only can they be good, I think they're probably essential to like having like a healthy, robust subjectivity. Doesn't seem like there's been a whole lot of thought or conversation about that though. I mean,
Yeah, I feel like a lot of the conversation, I'm kind of thinking of like anybody who would get featured on like the Joe Rogan podcast who has anything to talk about fitness, you
yeah.
know? And I'm just like, cool, like I feel like there's a lot here, but it's more in like a mainstream non-theory
Mm,
heavy uh discourse. Often more just like do these things or something. But oftentimes you'll hear people mention things like they feel like they're having spiritual experiences or um and they maybe they wouldn't describe it as psychoanalytic terms, but you know, they're almost like referring it to like these repetitious kind of things that happen and like just the things that happen to you when you are forced into um challenging yourself or being challenged by an other. Um, I just think it could be a lot more theoretically rich than what I just get from my normal my normie world, you know?
dude, critical media theory, critical doxology, and time energy. Um, yeah, I think we've been having that at Theory Underground. Like we've been having that conversation probably for the last 8-9 months. As far as like how do we take the positive structures that exist in that kind of bro Joe Rogan, like in that world where or like the self-help, self-improvement stuff, like how do we take that and make it rigorous and make it so it's not like just offensive on the face? Because I feel like we in the theory scene, I almost said we on the left, but I feel like we in the theory scene, maybe we need to be a little offended, right? And maybe we do need to be called out. Maybe we need to be called bitches sometimes. Um, to really draw us out of our shells or whatever, and rise to the call. Uh, I I
I
hope.
love referring back to the Mike Tyson quotation of everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And Levinas would say everyone has an ontology until they get punched by the other.
Mm-hmm. Or until they get called into question by the other. I would love to see like a rigorous work on that. I think we're in dire need of it. Like in the theory scene, like yeah, we don't have the theorist of excellence. Everyone's so afraid of the idea of excellence. I mean, you could say Sloterdijk is doing his own thing, but Sloterdijk he's not focusing on just this. He's doing lots of other shit, and I love Sloterdijk. But if like no, we need someone to come through and be a champion and say, I'm gonna celebrate fucking excellence. Yeah. So that was tying a bow on the Olympics tangent and also bringing it, I think, really in line with Levinas' justification. To be honest, that is a word I kind of rolled over. But I think our conversation tonight helped kind of solidify my understanding of what he means by justification and justice. Being called by the other and having to account for it, but not necessarily in this instrumental way, but or at least I don't know. I don't know if he's doing an instrumentalism or not, but
I mean, I feel like we're barely getting into his use of justice. So, and I know even Zachary, I think, had a question related to justice on the forum. So I can imagine that'll be something we'll be bringing back up again. Um,
hell yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
but I'm gonna dip. I don't know if you guys are gonna keep talking or not.
yeah, I think I'm gonna boogie woogie oogie as well. I'm gonna end the stream real quick and then YouTube, Mandy,
YouTube.
you've been here the whole time. Shout out Mandy. Dave was here, Vincent. I don't know if I missed anyone else. Thank you, all you guys. Anyone in the Levinas forum or in the Levinas course, looking forward to the discussions on Thursday and Friday and the lecture on Saturday. And we will catch you guys soon. So peace out, guys. And okay, that's over.